Welcome to my channel. If you're looking for an amazing novel, visit my Patreon page. Your support will help turn this story into an exciting audiobook. Join me on this journey. R18 Chapter Notice. I skip all R18 content to follow YouTube's guidelines and avoid getting a strike. Chapter 21. The Warp. After spending more time than he first expected, Bann was finally able to find the void suit in the frigate of the Empire that was called the Blazing Feather, which was the personal ship of the Inquisitor and his acolytes. A big ship for a simple man, in Bann's opinion, was a waste, but such was the reality of this universe that he simply shrugged it off. It was a problem of the Imperium after all. Eyeing the same corridor he has been using until now, Bann gestured to his teammates of their arrival. Slowing down their speed and hasting them to stand beside him, Bann let out Augusta from his grasp and opened the metal doors. As soon as they rushed inside and slammed the door shut, they were met with a sight that piqued their curiosity, yet repulsed them at the same time. The expansive corridor stretched out before them, shrouded in shadows and illuminated dimly by flickering candles that cast eerie shadows on the rusted metal walls. The atmosphere was so gloomy and ominous that it seemed to be straight out of a horror movie. Augusta, who took off her helmet, looked pissly at Bann, who during the flight grabbed her by the tummy. And although she understood why he had done it, at the extreme speed they flew, it was sure to put her in danger if she ever slipped. Still, that didn't mean she didn't feel repelled by his touch or his presence. This place is horrible. The voice of Celery could be heard as she eyed with clear disgust the corridor. It's certainly rustic, but I can't say anything since our base is in no better condition, hee. Ruku laughed as he eyed around. His eyes land on the previous slaves looking at them with intrigue. Saving the question for later, they followed Bann as he walked forward while he spoke. It doesn't matter if it's horrible or not, this place works, which is the most important aspect of it. Ramla, who looked around, couldn't help but wonder, are we going to live here? She wasn't against such an idea, but she wanted to train, and with such a tight place she didn't believe she would be able to. Bann tilted his head sideways while he explained with an unsure tone, this place has many tools that could help us defend this planet, while also having a hangar bay, its industrial complex, and other things that enable it to produce weapons, ammunition, and small ships. But we cannot train in it, Ruku pointed out. Bann nodded his head. Exactly, we have all the space we want outside, but we wouldn't be battling long enough before we need to take a breath again. He let out a sigh of frustration. His body was aching for another training. The previous battles didn't even work as a warm-up. As they continued walking the corridors of the space station, the Syans couldn't help but notice the amount of people that were still alive in it, with Celery pointing this out. Didn't you clean this place from its previous owner? What are all these people? The looks of surprise along reverences were slightly bothering her, as she wasn't accustomed to such. Bann sighed while he answered her. Most of these people were previous slaves, the rest were workers that maintain this place functioning, so I cannot afford to kill them. With a simple "oh," Celery then shut her mouth and continued eyeing around. Some time later, they found themselves standing in the royal chamber of the station. The room had been thoroughly purged of the blood and corpses that had once littered the area. Despite the best efforts to restore the space, remnants of the violent altercation still lingered, scars etched into the walls as a testament to the tumultuous event that had taken place. Yet, nobody bothered to take notice of the damage, for their eyes were all fixated on the massive window that overlooked the planet and the sprawling docking bay. There they all looked over the 3 ships docked in the various corridors that connected the hangar bay with the space station. Those are the ships, each one of them still had some personnel in them, but they are waiting for the troops on the planet. Bann gestured while stepping forward. Putting both hands on his back, he faced the window while he continued, their weapons are powerful. Well, some of them, if none of us is careful, could even take one of our limbs without effort. And how do you know that? Ruku asked with a confused expression. Bann snapped his head in his direction and said with a grin, just look at the size of those batteries. He making Celery groan in annoyance and Ramla looking at loss. Ruku only chuckled at his words, yet he stared intently at the ships. I like their designs, he commented. Bann nodded as he agreed. I do too. They could be better, simply said Celery while Ramla looked around the royal chamber. So we're not going to destroy those ships and wait until the Sisters of Cielo get their bums into them and yeet away. Bann turned around once again as he announced. Looking at his face, Celery asked while tilting her head, if you have already decided, then why did you bring us here? At her question, Ruku and Ramla turned to stare at Bann with curiosity. There would be a reason for making them do such a travel until here. Bann walked away from the window and motioned to one side where various couches of black leather could be seen facing each other alongside a coffee or tea table. Sitting himself in one of the couches, he padded beside him to Augusta to follow him, while the Syans take a seat around him. He then motioned to Ramla to turn on her scouter as he said, you'll be needing the live translator for this. She obeyed as she did what she was told and looked at both Bann and Augusta. After taking a moment to look at them with a serious look, Bann started with a low tone, there's something important that we need to address, a thing that I believe may pose a threat to not only us but our children too. Seeing him acting so serious and speaking about a threat, made even Celery eye Bann with more seriousness as she heard him with attention. I've come into the knowledge of the existence of a parallel reality called the Warp, a place where the beliefs and emotions of every being in the reality take form. One that seems to be filled with horrors and creatures such as daemons, gods, and other kinds of entities. Am I right, acolyte? Bann turned around and asked Augusta, who until then had a solemn look on her face as she kept hearing Bann's words. Everything he said until now could have been considered heretical, not because of what he said, but for knowing it. Yet realizing she couldn't judge them by the Imperium standard, she gulped down as she nodded her head. That's indeed the case. The warp can taint the soul of every mortal being. That means even you four cannot escape its clutches if they ever get a grasp of you. Ruku, who was now sitting at the edge of the couch, couldn't help but ask, and how do we know if the warp taints us? Eyeing the tall man, Augusta answered him with a solemn tone, it is only necessary for you to witness a creature from there to be tainted by the warp. From then on it is only upon you and your faith in the God Emperor to be able to withstand its rotting in your soul. She wasn't able to continue as Bann stopped her with his hand. We do not need a God Emperor whatsoever to be able to withstand the warp. Remember that our training does enhance our mind and spirit, thus we shouldn't be like the normal humans that fell into its clutches. Bann explained them while giving them a warning, though that doesn't mean it won't be able to lure you. Acolyte, tell them how the whispers of the warp work. Bann had to bite on his tongue to simply not say everything he knew about the warp, mostly because it would be weird for him to know such a thing. Just saying all of this was enough to make his teammates be surprised. Augusta, who was looking at their eyes, cast her gaze downwards as she grasped her hand's eye. I don't know that well in regards to how the wicked lure the humans into their grasp. She then raised her eyes to meet Bann's, but my master has told me they use whatever we wish in our hearts to promise us what we long for. Wait. Celery, who looked until now with strangeness, couldn't help but ask, but how do we know if it's affecting us? I mean, we're Saiyans after all. Her voice sounded unsure. Bann looked over her and asked, you're talking about our might? Celery nodded as she answered, this is not about might, we're talking about beings that can put us against each other, that could snare our children and corrupt them. It's more complicated than simply pulp daemons to ashes. Augusta nodded her head with fervor as she added, each time we deal with chaos cultists and daemons from the warp, we have to cleanse the places or even destroy entire villages. Their taint is beyond what you can imagine. The things that a normal person is capable of doing when possessed or corrupted are far beyond the most evil and gruesome things you can fathom. As Augusta spoke those words, her face contorted into an expression of disgust and terror, visible to all those around her. The intense emotions she conveyed were unmistakable and left a lasting impression on the listeners. That is why they burn those witches, as they call them, though they have another name, Psychers. They are humans or other beings that can use the warp to channel powers of a wide variety. Am I right, Acolyte? Bann asked while he gave Augusta a knowing smile. The latter gulped down as she nodded. That's indeed the case. The witches are people who showcase supernatural abilities. Just like how you fly or throw energy with your hands. They too are capable of feats like those. Just when Celery was about to interrupt her, Augusta continued. However, the witches are prone to be possessed by daemons each time they use their abilities. And once they are possessed, it's up to fate for their worlds not to be invaded through them by the daemons. There was a hollow look on Augusta's face as she said this. Bann, who inspected the woman until now, gestured with his hands as he explained, the acolyte here is a Psycher. One that seemed to have been trained to be safe around, right? Augusta looked at Bann with a complicated expression as she slowly nodded her head. Indeed. I am a sanctioned Psycher. Someone the Imperium has deemed as capable of using my abilities. When Augusta said that, there was a clear look of sorrow on her face that it was clear for everyone to see. And what happens to those they don't deem as capable of such? Asked Ruku with intrigue. I don't know. When we were taken by the black ship, they separated us and left us in the dark for months. That is until they judge our abilities and our will. She went silent after saying this. It was Bann who once again took the lead as he answered in her stead, they are probably killed, I assume, since that's what they do with the witches. So we have to take care of these witches and the warp, right? Is that all you wanted to talk about? Asked Celery with a raised brow. Bann shook his head and gave a side glance at Augusta while he explained, I wanted to introduce you to it, but here our friend will be helping us to delve deeper into the warp. Seeing the maniacal smile on Bann's face made the Saiyans feel a chill down their spine as Ruku couldn't help but ask, what are you planning? With a ruthless glint in his eyes, Bann answered him, we're going to practice with the warp, and if it's possible, we're going to gaze into it. The guttural laugh of Bann alongside his words made Augusta look at them with horror written on her face. The consequences of individuals like them succumbing to the nefarious and corrupting forces of the ruinous powers were simply unfathomable. The potential ramifications and aftermath of such a fall were so severe and far-reaching that she could scarcely comprehend the extent of the damage that could be wrought upon the galaxy. The mere thought of such an eventuality was enough to send shivers down her spine and fill her with a profound sense of dread and foreboding. Chapter 22, Teach Us. Until now I've been waiting patiently for my plans to come to fruition, years wasted thinking that I was still in the Dragon Ball universe and that I would have to abide with the knowledge I had about that universe. Yet now such plans were gone to waste. Years of careful manipulation of my teammates and visions of myself getting my hands on the Dragon Balls led me to nothing. And you can't blame me. For all I knew until one day ago was that I was a Saiyan who was sent to another planet to survive alongside 4 other Saiyans. The creme of the top from planet Vegeta. Kids that in other circumstances would have accompanied Prince Vegeta himself to plunder and lay waste to the whole universe. And who knows, maybe even take over his position. But if I stayed in the what-if mindset, my life would have passed, while I still be debating over things that don't need to be overthinking. What I knew now was that I was living currently in the Warhammer universe and some threats could crush any hope or goal I put myself. But that could easily corrupt my soul and forever haunt me until eternity. The few pieces of knowledge I've previously known about the warp and chaos were too vague to make me understand correctly the implications that they would have over me, as I was no longer a human, but a Saiyan that knew how to use ki. Looking over the Saiyans in front of me, a looming dread was slowly making itself more real, as the thought of just one of them falling into the hands of Kern was simply too horrendous to begin with. Stealing my mind, I cast a glance at the acolyte from the Inquisitor and said to her, due to your knowledge in regards to the warp, the beings lurking in it, and the Psychers, you'll be teaching us everything you know. As more words escaped my lips, I was able to notice the woman slowly getting paler as she listened. And for those things you are ignorant of, you'll tell us where we can find clues and the knowledge itself, I said while staring into her eyes. Seeing her trembling and biting her lips in a mess trying to say coherent words, I waited. How? I cannot do such a thing? If my master knows he will kill me. The acolyte was visibly shaken, and I couldn't help but wonder if it was because of the fear of getting killed, or because she couldn't put her head around about speaking such heresy and forbidden knowledge, without feeling the looming threat of her faith. Before I was able to mutter a word, Ruku beat me. You're not being asked, woman. The same master you're worrying about is alive only because of you. He looked over me when saying that, seemingly seeking acknowledgement to back his words. When he saw me nodding, he continued, your job will be to provide us not only with the information of such place, but train us daily in how to protect ourselves from it. The acolyte looked over between me and Ruku as she opened and closed her mouth for a couple of seconds, until she let out a deep breath, closed her eyes, and opened them while saying, I can tell you about the things I know from the warp, and the many horrors it harbors. But I can't help with your training, for all I've learned is how to control my powers and how to seek the light of the Emperor to expel the shadows that threaten me. Hearing her words made me sigh in disappointment, as she could have been the only person who could help us this early in that regard. Well, it is my fault for expecting such a thing from someone who is not well versed in such knowledge, I thought to myself while staring at the young face from the acolyte. There won't be lore master in real life to help you refresh your memory after all. I chuckled to myself in irony, until I remember something. Looking back at acolyte, I said to her, you may not be able to train us, but could guide someone who is a psyker or is awakening her power. My mind led me to remember the words that Cielo told me back in our conversation. The dreams where she saw me, or so she said, was one of the things that I remember reading from one of the novels of Warhammer. In that book, a psyker was able to foresee the future in her dreams while she awakened her powers. It ended with the woman being able to see the future. Though I wasn't able to finish the book and read her fate, I knew that Cielo may be having the same process. The acolyte frowned for a moment as she heard my question, but slowly started to nod. I guess I could try, although there may be some troubles. I didn't hear what else she could say. For all I know, for Cielo it may be useful. Maybe her not being trained by the Imperium would be a good thing, I thought to myself while trying to avoid raising flags. I remained silent and observant as I heard Ruku, Celery, and Ramla asking questions at the acolyte while getting a little grasp of what they could expect. What surprised them the most was how common the encounters with daemons were, as when the ships traveled through the Imperium, some of the more careless fellas looked over the windows and got tainted and corrupted by the chaos. Hearing how they literally traveled through hell to reach a system was an eye-opener for them, and made them realize the invaluable resource that our engines represent. Our most modern engines could travel thousands of times faster than light speed, and the ones that will be provided to the humans of Faradras could reach 800x FTL speeds, not only preventing humans from going through the ordeals that traveling through warp poses, but also gave an enormous advantage against the Imperium of mankind in regards to reaction speed, which alongside our scouters that could communicate through the whole galaxy in an instant, gave us a clear advantage that couldn't be countered easily. So the most aspect is our willpower? Asked Ramla in a horrendous low Gothic. The acolyte nodded her head while explaining, it is our will that prevents us from succumbing to their call. As she finished those words, I saw Ramla letting out a faint smile as she probably got cocky. It is easy to corrupt us, they only need to promise strength in our weakest time for us to fall. Do not get confident, I warned her while giving a glare to them. Celery scoffed while saying proudly, I will not let someone lend their strength to me. If I need to get stronger, I can only blame myself for being weak. If I cannot beat someone when getting Uzuro, is only reasonable for me to fall. The glint in her eyes was cold and absolute. She believes those words. Ruku nodded his head in agreement while he added, I won't let anyone get my soul for easy power. It is mine or it's not. Nothing would make me change my mind, he said with arrogance. Letting out a faint grin, I said to myself, I'll be damned before I ever let myself be lured by daemons. I believe in reincarnation and I won't do anything in my power to change my time of death. Who knows? Maybe another galactical burrito would send my soul to another animeverse. Only in death, I would know. The acolyte was looking over us with a complicated expression. She probably doubted our words, but I knew better. I guess I'll need to put a little more faith into the key training. I thought to myself while standing up. You said that in your ship there would be more scrolls and books that could help us, right? I asked the acolyte while remembering something she mentioned briefly during her explanation. Her face lit up as she also stood up while nodding. Yes, there are various scrolls that I have that could be useful. She then paused briefly as if pondering about something. Raising her gaze, she stared at me while saying, there's also someone there that could help your training. Although I don't know how you will get him to help you all. Her words picked up my interest as I didn't know to whom she might be referring. After all, there wasn't anyone who had an interesting amount of ki in those ships. Well, the biggest lecture was about the same as Cielo, who was almost reaching 800 units. I thought as I remembered the lecture given by the scouter, and who that might be. I asked her with a raised eyebrow. She gulped down as she answered with a solemn tone, the ship's navigator. I became speechless for a while as I stared at the acolyte with a plain look, until I rubbed my temples at my bad memory. If there are people in the Imperium that could train us in this regard, is them. How stupid can I be? I scolded myself while giving a smile to the acolyte. Take us to him if that's the case, I ordered to her while she looked troubled but started walking nonetheless. I gestured to the others to follow us as I walked behind the acolyte. Along the path, we received the same stares from the freed slaves. It was slightly uncomfortable. I simply did not look at them and remained staring at the acolyte's back. So what's the deal with this navigator? Asked Celery, who accelerated her steps to walk beside me. The acolyte didn't look at her as she tried to look carefully at the right corridor to not get lost. They are the ones that enable us to travel through the warp. I don't know much about them aside from the amount of respect that Inquisitor Gannicus had for him, and that only a few saw them from time to time. She answered while continuing walking as she carefully eyed the surroundings. I glanced back at Celery as I saw a frown forming on her face while she asked with strangeness, is not a machine or another piece the one that does it? It was clear she wasn't able to grasp her mind to understand the notion. The acolyte nodded with fervor as she said, yes, it is him who is the one capable of doing, and only him. After saying those words we fell into silence as we continued making our way towards the ship. It took us around 20 minutes to continue walking at a fast pace until we reached the pressurized door that connected with the ship. Before long we were inside the ship traveling through its corridors. Some guards looked wary at me, yet they didn't say a word as they simply saluted the acolyte as we made our way up into the ship until we finally located the room where the navigator was supposed to be. 2 were the grunts guarding the door as they ordered us to stop. Though sadly for them, before the acolyte could utter a word they were knocked out by Celery's key blast. She then walked forward and knocked on the metallic door with a resounding force that resounded loudly through the lengthy corridor. Clang, clang, clang. She didn't wait for an answer before opening the door without effort. I'm coming in, she said as she threw the door to the side. I stepped behind her while giving a toothy smile. Was the acolyte, who alarmed followed by my side. On our way inside I was able to spot a figure giving us his back. The room was a spacious one with a humble decoration. Candles were lit around the metallic room as the soot in the walls showed they hadn't been cleaned in a long time. An interesting machine was at the center of the room, with various wires around it and a place where I deducted someone could get into. The hooded figure slowly turned around as he supported his body with a metallic staff with a top that resembled an eye. His robe was black with golden stripes. Golden ornaments adorned his hands, neck, and waist. Yet my eyes were taken by his face. His sunken white eyes and deep bags were too visible. His skin was pale and his lips thin. In front of his forehead, a piece of cloth was covering what I assumed was his third eye. Who are thou? What's the meaning of this insolent intrusion into my chambers? His voice was ragged but gave me a sense of wisdom. Yet it held a conviction and raw power on it, different from his weary look. I gestured to Celery that I would take care of the business here and stated, my name is Bann and I'm the current ruler of Faradras alongside my companions here. I moved to the side while gesturing with my arm to present them. The navigator eyed each of them, yet when he landed on the acolyte he said, I didn't remember that the acolyte Augusta was the ruler of a world. It is surprising how fast she rose from the ranks, it seems. I let out a chuckle at his words while the acolyte, who seemed to be named Augusta, looked troubled and tried to explain herself. It's not like that, my lord. I didn't let her continue as I turned around and said to the man, I can assure you that she's not a planetary governor. Her current situation is more complicated than that. My words seemed to pique the interest of the navigator, who said, well, I'm sure that's an interesting story to hear about, but thou didn't answer my question. What's the meaning of your intrusion? I saw his hand gripping his staff while he said those words. I smiled at the man as I answered him truthfully, we're here in the name of knowledge, and more importantly, to prevent a catastrophe from befalling this galaxy. Lowering my head to gaze into the man more directly I said, and you're the only one that could teach us. Or better said yet, to show us. Chapter 23, The Third Eye. The navigator had not expected such words to come out of my mouth, as the man stared at me for a moment until he burst out into a laugh. As soon as he laughed, I felt a strange sensation creeping up my spine. His laughter was unique and unusual, like the creaking of an old oak tree in the wind. It had a deep, rumbling quality that seemed to reverberate through the air. I suddenly felt a chill, as if the very sound of his laughter had the power to fill me with a sense of unease. It was a sound that I knew I wouldn't forget anytime soon. When he opened his eyes and stared at mine, I felt a pissed look gleaming into them as he said in a low but cold tone, your words are preposterous, brat. Arrogance and unbridled lack of respect won't lead you anywhere. And it won't certainly make me want to teach you. I didn't have to look behind me to see who was the one who had let her key rise, as Celery was the only one who always didn't take well when someone spoke to us this way. I gestured with my hand for her to calm down while I gave a faint smile to the navigator. In a regular situation you'll be in the right, though sadly for you, such is not the case. Saying those words I stepped towards the navigator while he frowned and moved his staff on my path. Halt there before I get angry, boy. I understand that cockiness is the demise of nobles, but don't be hasty into meeting the ultimate doom. His rough voice and tone promised to deliver such a threat into reality. Letting out a wide smile I said to the man, you see, that seems to be the issue here. I can barely contain myself to see what you are capable of. As soon as my words escaped my mouth, I saw a faint light shining from the man's forehead while his eyes took a light blue aura around them. Slowly he raised one of his hands, which I briefly noticed had an eye carved into his skin as the navigator slowly said, "I shall see your wish be done if that's the case." As I watched him, the cloth on his forehead suddenly fell to the ground, as if it had been thrown off by some unseen force. And then, a blazing surge of energy seemed to erupt from within him, causing my vision to be engulfed in a swirling vortex of chaos. Reality seemed to bend and twist around me, and the once familiar surroundings were transformed into a hellish landscape of crimson and a myriad of other colors, all swirling around me in a maelstrom of chaos. As I tried to take in my surroundings, I couldn't shake the feeling that hundreds of eyes were staring at me, watching my every move. It was an uncomfortable feeling, to say the least, and it only grew worse as I realized that an enormous amount of malicious intent seemed to be directed right at me. It was as if all of the negative energy in the world had suddenly been focused on me, and I couldn't help but feel as if I was in grave danger. Yet I wasn't able to focus on my surroundings for long before I felt a powerful attack being directed at my key. Glaring at the man who was now looking over me with a frown, he seemed to be muttering something under his breath. Arg! I let out a groan as my key exploded outward, erasing the painful feeling from my spirit. With a defiant look, I saw my key aura overriding the hellscape as I said to the man, "I don't need an illusion, I want to see the real thing." I felt other keys burst behind me as it was most likely that Celery and the others fell into the attack. The navigator stayed silent for a moment while he stared at each one of us. It is the first time that I met someone able to withstand not only seeing my third eye but also able to resist the full bent of its power. I saw his knuckles getting even wider as he grasped tight at his staff. "We don't need your death, old man. You're more useful alive than being just a corpse," I told him warily. I was under the impression he was preparing himself to fight until death. His third eye never stopped giving a faint hue as he looked over me. I had to focus on him to not fall into the same illusion once again. Stepping once again towards him, I felt a pressure being placed upon my whole body. With a stern look, I told him, "Cut this foolishness. We just want to have you show us the warp and the beings that lurk there. We need to understand what are we dealing with. Are you going to cooperate, or do we need other means?" I knew that my choice of words wasn't the ideal one to deal with the man, who probably had some ego, but the roles here were clear. We didn't come to entertain and fulfill the vanity of an old man. There was a more important matter at hand. The navigator stayed silent for a moment, seemingly assessing his situation. The room grew tense as seconds passed. "What is it for me in exchange?" he asked after a few moments of pondering. "Not having your skull servings as a chalice to drink honey wine, to begin with." Celery instantly snapped while I held out a laugh. I saw an enraged expression on the man's face as he was about to lash out, yet I spoke first. "What's in for you is a favor from me. I know you probably don't know who I am or my teammates, but soon words will spread and you will undoubtedly hear from us." When he heard my words, he scoffed audibly, though he didn't say anything and just eyed me from head to toe. Remembering my looks, "I cannot say thou aren't an impressive individual, just the feat of thou being able to talk with me while bearing the full brunt of my power, speak loud enough." He paused for a moment. "I will take your words, but I need more. Thou said you wanted to see the real thing, am I right?" I nodded my head in answer as he continued, "I will send thou and your friends here in the warp if that's what you want. But if you can come back unscathed, then I'll take you somewhere to retrieve something that belongs to me." A smile was slowly forming on my face as I heard his words, yet he cut me short. "Thou are lucky that is I who you're asking this, for if ever was someone else, thou would be fooled to die." The faint hue on his eyes started to diminish, as he pointed his staff towards my forehead slowly. "For the warp can kill everyone, powerful or not. You wouldn't be able to escape such fate if I sent you there." As the eye was about to touch my forehead, I heard him last saying, "But that doesn't mean there are no other ways to let you feel the warp." Then it happened. As my eyes shut, I was engulfed in a swirling mass of crimson hues, reminiscent of a dense nebula. The aroma of charred embers mixed with the pungent stench of rotten eggs filled my nostrils. The lack of oxygen was suffocating, and I gasped for air, but to no avail. My body felt as though it was being crushed by an unknown force, and I writhed in agony as it attacked every fiber of my being. It was as though something was trying to obliterate me from existence, and I had an overwhelming urge to scream in pain. I felt a sudden surge of intense pressure, overwhelming my body. In response, I instinctively released my key. A powerful torrent of energy was released from within me. A whitish aura enveloped me, and I could feel the pressure slowly decreasing, but not ceasing entirely. My survival instinct kicked in as the aura grew stronger. It illuminated my surroundings in an otherworldly light. I surveyed the area with great care, my eyes fixed on the nebula in the distance. It was a sight to behold, but also eerie and unnerving. The nebula seemed to swirl and pulse with a life of its own, and it felt like I was standing at the edge of a great abyss. It was a place that could only be described as the purgatory from hell, a realm of chaos and uncertainty. As I scanned my surroundings, I saw the light gave way to the darkness, the shadows resembling the maw of beasts. While floating, I couldn't but wonder if this was the nature of the warp, or something more tranquil. I was aware that the warp was not uniform in its nature. In certain areas, there were violent storms that destroyed everything in their path, while other regions were teeming with daemons and other terrifying entities that inhabited the Imperium. Meanwhile, there were places like the one I was currently traversing, which were comparatively peaceful. However, beneath that seemingly peaceful, lay a region that was completely devoid of life and could easily crush any human in an instant. As I kept floating I couldn't help but wonder, this was supposed to be the other side of the reality I was living in? Eyeing once to the nebula I strained my eyes, trying to pick anything that could be useful. Yet before I was able to see more than a few sparks of light, I was taken aback. The sight of the warp stretched into my eyes, while a passage to reality was made once again, with me now standing in front of the navigator who looked at me with surprise. I looked around in search of my companions but it was then that I noticed I was alone with the navigator. Where are they? I asked coldly. Thou art formidable, it didn't last 1 minute yet thou are here. He ignored my question, what had thou seen? He instead asked me back. Before he could even notice I was grasping him by his neck, yet I was inside taken aback by something I noticed. For a moment the navigator moved with such speed that almost made me miss him. Where are they? I'm not going to ask again. I decreased my grip as I let him answer. His eyes once again let out a hue of light. Yet there was now a trail that followed the aura, as he struggled in my grip. I didn't know what he was doing, only that he was attacking me as a deep pain shrouded my mind. Yet I never once released the navigator. This won't do, I thought to myself while I gathered an invisible amount of ki in my hand. It wasn't energy, but spiritual ki. Letting my ki go, I saw the navigator trembling while a muffled groan escaped his mouth before he passed out. It was at that exact moment that Celery, Ruku and Ramla appeared back. As they tapped the ground I couldn't help but notice how each of them was tensed and battle-ready. The one that shocked me the most was Celery, who was visibly pale and frightened. Her eyes quickly scanned around the room as if looking for the reason behind such a reaction. Only when her eyes landed on me, she seemed to relax while staring at me with a complicated gaze. She walked forward while her mouth moved slightly as if trying to say something, yet only stayed silent while she opened her arms wide and hugged my waist. That was the warp, wasn't it? She asked in a muffled voice. Throwing the navigator to the side, I caressed her lavender hair while answering that seemed to be, what happened? What have you seen? She simply shook her head while she applied more pressure to the hug. I heard a choke and I realized she was crying, though not surprised by her mood swings, as she was the one most prone to have them. It made me wonder what had she experienced to let out her proud facade and cry. Nonetheless, I picked her by the waist and let her hug my neck while I caressed her head. Are you two okay? What's your first impression of the warp? Wanting to divert the attention from Celery, I asked. Ruku let out a deep sigh while he answered. First, there were foul creatures like that acolyte spoke about. They didn't pose a problem, but were scary indeed. Ramla nodded her head as she backed her brother's words. Yes, they were red, with spiky mouths, and were so ugly. I even puked at one of them since they were so smelly. Her face contorted to an expression of disgust while saying that, though she quickly flexed her right bicep while she boasted, but after a blast, they were quickly gone. Huh? You should have seen the look on the faces of the other daemons. I'm glad you two are okay. I nodded at them. While carrying the crying Celery in my arms, I asked Ruku to carry the navigator on his shoulder while I tried to locate Augusta. The woman seemed to slip away while everything happened with the navigator, though she wasn't gone for long, as we find her on the bridge of the ship speaking with a woman with robes. When she saw us, she looked as if caught red-handed. I didn't bother with her antics as I quickly told her to follow us. Augusta spoke with the woman in a hushed tone before following us. She didn't say a word after seeing the knocked navigator on Ruku's shoulder while we quickly made our way back to the station. Back in the royal chamber, Ruku let the navigator lay on the floor while he sat on the couch, with his sister on his left side. Meanwhile, I sat with Celery on the right couch beside Ruku's while Augusta stayed standing. So that's the warp, I guess. Although I didn't see any daemon or creature, it was a terrible place to be in. I spoke loudly after a few moments. I saw the siblings nodding while Ruku said, I still cannot understand how this woman can use the warp to use attacks. He eyed with intrigue at Augusta. I made a dismissing motion with my hand as I looked over the two with a serious look. That's not important. You should now be aware of the strange nature of this place. Don't get confident and always go all out, or else our duty will fall. I tried to make them understand the severity of our situation, and although I saw the two of them alongside Celery humming an in response, I couldn't but shake the feeling I wasn't clear enough. I let out a sigh while I moved my gaze toward the large window that overlooked Faradras. A world was now under our reign, one of many. For that, it's what I hoped. Chapter 24, a hope somewhere in the far reach of Ultima Segmentum. A stir has been ongoing for months in the craft world of Mimira. Although feeble at first many years ago, the whispers that many seers have been receiving were of such amount that made them unable to overlook what fate seemed to foretell them. Since then, they've been spending the last few months to ensure and decrypt what their visions told them. At first, they were reticent, even angry at the notion that their visions led them to, though the many paths that diverted if they were not to follow the words that fate gave them, promised the same outcome. A cataclysm too big to entail, and too disastrous to even assess the true damage it would last in the Eldari as a whole. Not even in their craft world the Mimira would be left unscathed if such were the case. With the threat looming, the Farseer Nairliak was now looking over the last of the visions that he entailed. In it, he saw not only the hope for the craft world Mimira but for them Eldars as a whole. A kid of such light and promise that would not only unite their race, but also defeat she who thirst. But such a kid would come into reality in only one of the many paths that fate showed him. A unique chance for their whole race to redeem. Letting out a heavy sigh, he opened his eyes while he stared at the two individuals who waited for him. On his right was the warlock Eurokan Rain, the man who would be leading such an important mission. On his shoulders would not only lay the responsibility of protecting his team but also say the necessary words to do what was needed. On his left was Irene Vathan, a warrior who would assist the warlock Uroken on this journey, and someone that would be of vital importance for fate to veer in their favor. I have seen who shall be the one that brings us hope. Nairlayak spoke after a moment. Uroken looked over him with solemnity as he barely concealed his racing heart and intrigue while he asked and who that might be. Farseer. A faint smile appeared on Nairlayak's face as he thought to himself, such a simple individual is the one that fate has chosen to be our only chance. Eyeing both Uroken and Irene, he spoke. A healer, she's called Anna Eth. Shall we meet her? He asked as he stood up and led the way outside. Both the warlock and the warrior looked at each other as they quickly followed behind Nairlayak. Both knew who he was referring to. As they fought and returned to the craft world, both were treated by this simple woman, though of great charm. Never both could imagine someone of her caliber would be the last chosen individual to thread this important mission. With their minds thrown in disarray, both were unable to enjoy the beautiful scenery of the craft world, the only place that held vestiges of their home world. They walked not for long, and in a couple of minutes they were in front of the building that held Anna Eth inside. Receiving kind gestures of respect from passers-by, they made their way inside as the Farseer looked over amidst the people inside. When his eyes landed upon the woman in question, a heavy knot was formed on his chest. Yet Nairlayak walked with confidence as he maintained his gaze on the healer, who, intrigued by the commotion, couldn't help but wonder why was the scary Farseer walking towards her with such a stern face. Once a few steps before her, Nairlayak stopped on his track as with a gentle voice he said, "Anna Eth Arthat, I am here to ask for your help." His words made Anna Eth be stunned for a moment until she couldn't help but ask him in a soothing voice, "What can I do for you, Farseer?" Not leaving his eyes from looking at hers, he spoke with a resolute tone, "There's a mission of vital importance that needs your skills. Can you follow me to give you the details?" He gestured to the side while motioning to the door. Anna Eth looked over the warlock and the warrior with intrigue, yet she nodded her head, though not before leaving instructions to the other healers in the building. After making their way out, Nairlayak led them towards one of the hangar bays, though it was far from their current position, giving him enough time to explain Anna Eth their mission. The warlock Uroken and the warrior Eileen would be going on a mission to an alien world. There they would be an important individual that would greatly help our craft world to withstand what is to come. Nairlayak explained to Anna Eth with a calm tone. Anna Eth only nodded her head while saying umo each time he finished one oration. Your abilities would be necessary for the man, more than you could ever think. However, I must warn you of the threats this mission could entail. Enemies of all kinds would be in your path, you must survive at whatever may be cost. Remember it, as your abilities would be necessary for the survival of that man, and the consequent survival of our home. The Farseer opened his arms as he gestured to the gorgeous scenery around them, making Anna Eth gulp down while she nodded her head with conviction. I would not let you down, Farseer. I'm going to make sure that this man would be always patched up for every threat that could endanger us, she said with a serious face. But, how long I'll be away? I do not wish to become an outcast. She looked away while muttering under her breath. Nairlayak let out a sigh as he closed his eyes. It hurt him to deceive the simple woman, as her fate was much more than he said. Yet with a heavy heart, he soothed her mind with a lie. It won't be long, Anna Eth. I can assure you that we won't receive you as an outcast. This will be a mission of vital importance that I will make sure to everyone understand. He then looked in front as the hangar bay came into vision while he said, you'll be going to take a small ship for this voyage. Do not fret of what you might see, as fate would lead you to your fated path. Anna Eth looked alarmed around as she exclaimed, alarmed, wait, I haven't brought with me anything. Yet she was dismissed by the Farseer as he continued explaining to Uroken and Eileen. He is known as Bann, don't try to speak with any other that isn't him, for them will only lead the mission to failure. He saw both warlock and warrior nodding at his words. There is a maid world nearby with a small population of our brethren. They would be the key to any agreement you may reach. All the coordinates of the system are on board the ship, Nairlayak explained while they walked beside a small ship that could hold a squad of warriors. Eileen put on her helmet as Uroken held his beside his right arm. I hope to see you again, Farseer, and with good news at that, Uroken said with respect as he slightly bowed his head. Nairlayak reciprocated the gesture as he said his farewell too. I'm sure you will, Uroken. I wish you all three a good voyage and that our endeavor meets success. With those parting words, they forced Anna Eth inside amidst the barrage of questions concerning clothes, panties, and other necessities the healer deemed as important for such travel. Yet her words weren't heard as she saw with perplexity the colossal craft world being left behind as they headed towards one of the webways. The galaxy has now begun to change. Plans were about to be thrown away as the future changed, and with it, the last hope of the Eldari. Faradra's system, unknown date. For the last 2 days, Bann alongside the other Saiyans, aside from Aprit, spend their time on the space station, reading all the books that Augusta and Inquisitor held in their library. Although it was pretty much garbage knowledge with a biased look at the Imperium, they all gathered interesting information while doing so, from names of interesting individuals to rumors and secrets never told by the Inquisitor. However, what was more important was a knowledge of the state of certain planets, the state of the Ordo Xenos, and the sector fleet of their position. Thanks to it, Bann was finally able to see where he was standing on the galaxy map. The Faradra's planet was somewhere in the Acteron sector of the Ultima Segmentum, in the eastern fringe. A dangerous place if he wasn't wrong, though far away enough from the Imperium's strongest forces. Aside from Ultramar, that's it. He also came into knowledge of the approximate date of the galaxy. They were in between the 989 to 991 of the 41st millennium. The matter in regards to dates seemed to be a messy one, as it was a constant mess of wrong-put dates, events that didn't make sense in the told dates, and so on. The explanation of all of it was due to the warp. As its nature was devoid of any time, the fleets could appear at different times when they returned to reality, leading to all kinds of events that lead to a messy timeline to follow for Bann. Nonetheless, all of this information seemed to prove to be fruitful, as Bann at least knew he was in the 41st millennium, which was a good and bad thing at the same time. Though none of the scrolls, maps, and books were words of the cicatrix maledictum, which was a matter that concerned Bann greatly as such an event was a big one, and he didn't want to partake in the making of history, to begin with. With those thoughts swirling through his mind, Bann was now resting as he looked over the battered Inquisitor that lay on the marble floor of the station. On his side was Augusta, who looked troubled as she eyed Bann alongside his retinue of Syans. Once again, Gannicus, you're going to take that ship with the Battle Sisters, and you're going to hunt down someone else without bothering me, is that clear? Asked Bann with an exasperated tone. His good mood due to the bountiful catch of knowledge was about to get spoiled by the hard head of the Inquisitor. He didn't kill the man for a simple reason: it would lead more Inquisitors in search of his whereabouts and most likely a large fleet that Bann didn't want to deal with. Gannicus stood defiant on his knees as he spat at the floor in front of Bann while groaning, "I'll be dead," before surrendering a world to a Xenos. Looking over at Augusta, he said to her, "Can you bring some sense into his head? The troops have been cleaning the orcs while this man is unable to see what's good for the Empire." Although the number of losses that the remained guardsmen suffered while cleansing the orc plague was high, it was a successful cleansing raid by the Imperium standards. It seemed that after almost a decade of orcs being vaporized and killed left and right by Bann and the other Syans, made the green fungus grew way stronger than it should have been. "Augusta, how could you have been colluding with these Xenos? I thought better of you." The angry voice of the Inquisitor resounded through the chamber, making Celery let out a groan of exasperation and exit the chamber. Meanwhile, Augusta looked troubled and threw a glance at Bann while she tried to explain her situation. "It's not like that, milord. They told me if I didn't follow their words, you would have been killed." Yet her words, instead of pacifying the Inquisitor, added fuel to his rage. "And I would willingly die instead of witnessing this folly." Not able to withstand it any longer, Bann appeared in front of the Inquisitor and he gave a light slap to the man's face, which made the Inquisitor's head snap violently to the side as he lost consciousness. "Please, don't kill him. I'll do anything you ask, but don't," Augusta pleaded, afraid of the fate that awaited her mentor. Bann just eyed her while letting out a tch. He turned around and looked over at Ruku and Ramla while he told them go back and try to see that those nuns don't end up killing themselves at the hands of the Horde. While Ramla nodded her head in contentment at the notion of letting out some steam, Ruku frowned while he protested, "Why should I take care of your promise? It's not my duty to keep an eye on them." And with those words, he turned around and left. Bann eyed his back while letting out a sigh. It wasn't easy to deal with a bunch of hot-headed monkeys, though he was thankful that they were more reasonable than their counterparts on the TV show. Feeling the 3 keys signatures of the Syans leaving the space station, Bann walked towards one of the tables as he drank up the cup with honey wine. Sitting up on the couch, he let out a sigh as he eyed Augusta from head to toe. "You said you'll do anything I ask for that idiot to live?" he asked her with a plain tone. Augusta gulped down as she answered, "Yes. He saved me countless times and gave me a purpose. This is the least I could do," she answered with a solemn look. Put in his drink on the table, Bann said to her with an amusing tone, "Then, I hope you hold the same resolution after this." It was time to test the loyalty of an acolyte. And time for Bann to find some relief. Chapter 27, Wheel of Power. For the last few days, Redentia has been thrown into chaos. All of its citizens have seen the arrival of men from the sky that all of the preachers announced were the arms that carried his will. With the streets filled with soldiers from a foreign and faraway place, and the frantic chants and prayers given by the various preachers through their Vox device, the population was put into tense as the past explosions in the sky 2 days ago, alongside the whispers that spoke of powerful beings taking hold of this world, made the poor and ignorant inhabitants of the capital city filled with apprehension and unrest. For all their lives they have only known one constant, and that order, something of which has been lost these days. However, it wasn't the people who were the most restless and filled with uncertainty, but those who have spoken with those who have been present at the showcase of might provided by the Xenos that made themselves known. Worst yet, their minds were fearful of the announced change of reign in this world, as none could escape from this world, because the ones that could taken them away lay now silent as they followed orders, unable to raise a word of dissent. The Imperial Guard was subdued as they followed the order given by the officers, cleaning away the orcs that settled in the wildlands of Faradras and protecting villages and small towns alike. Though many were prepared to do such work, as that was what they'd been told would be their duty, none wore a smile. For words have been spread like wildfire amidst their ranks, even when the Commissar has worked arduously to prevent it. Yet such was the nature of the human being. Nonetheless, the guardsmen had but one job, and that it was of giving death to the Imperium's many foes. And with orders clear from the command head, they did silently their job as they awaited. While in the palace of Redentia, both nobles and Imperial officers tried to maintain a chain of command. Those nobles in higher positions were now all reunited in the eviction chamber, alongside their servants and other figures of importance. looking with anxiety and fear at the figure sitting in the middle of the wide chamber. There, sitting on the one chair used by Redentia Senes Chal, was sitting a man of formidable appearance. His eyes were of an onyx color, and his eyes were stern, giving him a commanding gaze. His brows were sharp like blades, giving his commanding eyes a more threatening aura as they shaped a pissed look to his visage. His cheeks were high and bony, while his chiseled jawline was sharp, complementing his handsome features on the rest of his face. His dark mane was long, reaching his shoulders easily as his locks were wild, giving him a barbarian yet regal look. His neck was thick as it was filled with muscles that seemed to brim with strength. The rest of his body was covered in a black spandex that was tight fit to his body, showcasing his powerful limbs that were of such size that no man in Redentia could compare with. His chest and waist were covered in a strange armor for the nobles, that looked like nothing they'd ever seen. Just with his physical appearance alone, he made the various figures that held so much power in the room dim at his presence. Yet the man carried himself with an aura of indomitable power that made even the boldest in the room to bite his tongue and remain silent. And last but not least, the census has shown that our population is young, with a higher percentage of women than men. The old voice of one minister could be heard as he finished giving the recounts of Redentia affairs. Once the scholars you've sent to our base finish with their learning, we will begin the reforms for not only this capital but this planet to flourish and expand their population. Bann's deep voice powerfully reverberates throughout the chamber as he states, "We are going to need more hands to increase the yields once the primary goods are gathered and the first of our machines are built. I need the population well-fed and intelligent if I want to get good results. Ensure their education to step up a notch while giving incentives to the young to form more families alongside getting more kids." He eyed the minister when saying so, for then stared the various nobles in his field of vision. "As you wish, sire," the minister said as he stepped back and retreated to one of the seats. As silence remained along the chamber, aside from some coughs, Bann spoke once again. "You are probably expecting to get more richness and more power to hold. Yet I must warn you all, none of it would happen in the meantime. For I need your coins and power to improve this world, in exchange as I promise your troops would wear our armors that could take hits from those lasguns of the Imperial Guard." Murmurs and whispers spread through the nobles as they gulped down in greediness at the notion, while Bann continues, "Our weapons are easily more powerful than anything that the regular infantry of the Imperium can wield. Alongside our ships, your troops would be undisputed in any field. Any world that we conquer would have plenty of lands for you to lay your hands." Many salivate at the notion of such a thing, aware of the trades they could partake in while increasing the coffers of their families. With ships that didn't require the use of the warp, they could travel safely while getting rich in but a fraction of the time a regular trader from the Imperium needed. Yet you should all be aware of the fate that awaits from any of you who dares to hold treacherous thoughts. We the Saiyan and all of our descendants will be the ones to rule each world, and all of you will answer to their will. His words brought the nobles back from their imagination as they shuddered at the cold reminder. Seeing one hand being raised, Bann eyed one man as he rose to his feet and asked, "Sire, and what about the families that hold ties with your people? Will our family rule alongside the Saiyan descendants?" His tone was fearful yet respectful. Bann nodded his head while saying that would be indeed the case, but just like a royal family, there would be a hierarchy to respect and you should all be aware of it. The man bowed his head while a grin appeared on his face. Moving his gaze towards the position he remembered the ginger beauty was sitting, Bann spoke aloud, "Speaking of which, after this meeting is finished, I hope for you all to present those whom you should seek to marry me. I will hold only 2 concubines in the meantime, from which our children will be the rulers of worlds of their own." He saw Aurora raising her face as she stared him back. Grinning at her, he then moved to look around once again as he said, "Though I won't shun any offer to bear more offspring, just be aware that none of them will receive the benefits that both my wives would have." Bann said those words for a simple reason. They needed numbers, a whole lot of them. Once they start to conquer nearby systems, they would need someone to not only act as their regents but also defend them while ensuring the loyalty of such places. As each Saiyan hybrid has a higher potential than a regular one, alongside their more clever-minded nature, they would make good rulers and military officers for the unimpending Saiyan army. One army that would numbers in bulk to act as squads to be sent to each world to attack, defend, and conquer. For the enemies they would face would be more than they could ever fathom. While Bann himself could potentially conquer a world by himself and destroy entire armies with ease, his energy and stamina were limited while the constant waves and attacks could overrun him. And that was without counting the warp, which has proven to be somewhat problematic not only for him but the other Saiyans too, showing that they weren't immune to it, for Bann's chagrin. Although they have showcased a higher defense and tolerance to the taint of chaos, they would inevitably fall into it once they get tired and their ki ran out, which was the reason why he decided to take such a path. Although he never liked and respected those men who abandoned their kids, he was now about to follow their actions. Though he would train and guide them all he could, but without being the parent he would have liked to be, much to his despair. "I know I could have done better, but this is the best I can come up with in my current situation." He tried to reassure his mind, though the guilt for doing an act he hadn't done already was slowly taking root. Eyeing the nefarious looks that many nobles held after hearing his words, Bann let out a sigh while he continued explaining to them the things that needed to be done immediately. Radical changes were about to be made in the livelihood of Faradra's citizens, preparing them for the new era that has begun. It wouldn't be until the night that the nobles were allowed to exit the chamber, with dozens of papers with written orders and tasks to be done. Hundreds of servants exited the palace in their horses while spreading the first of the orders. Roads, schools, houses, and even districts were about to be built while the buildable infrastructure would be constructed in the meantime. But that wasn't all, for the most important order that was given in the palace was the one that would forever alter the fate of the galaxy. The various churches and their preachers were about to face such unimaginable change that none of them saw it coming. Yet while the gears of change started moving outside, in the eviction chamber remained a good amount of people. Bann stood stoically amidst a group of eager suitors, all vying for his attention. The air was thick with anticipation as the young maidens fidgeted nervously, presenting their houses and delicate hands to the seasoned warrior. His red-colored scouter rested against the side of his face, its advanced technology analyzing each of the women in intricate detail. Despite their beauty and grace, none of them stood out from the others. Their unremarkable key and pale complexions gave little indication of the full lives they had led thus far. It was clear that they had never made any real effort in the martial arts, but Bann knew that they possessed a keen mind for politics. He watched them carefully, studying their reactions as they vied for his favor. I should have taken someone as an advisor to tell me who the fuck will be the most suitable of them, Bann admonished to himself as he acknowledged his lack of information in regards to their family standings. He stood there patiently, his attention fully focused on each woman as she shared her pedigree and the grandiose family she came from. He engaged in small talk with each one, carefully selecting his words while his eyes roamed over their appearance, taking note of every detail that stood out. With a discerning eye, he selected those who caught his attention and seemed to have that extra special something. Though he wouldn't decide now as this was just their formal presentation, he would play into their shenanigans about fancying a noblewoman as he would learn anything useful for them on a later occasion. Though they would kill me for spending time with girls instead of training with them, ha. He chuckled to himself while he parted ways with the last of the nobles. Turning around to see Aurora Fenitos who remained in her position in the seat. He had asked her to remain back as he wanted to talk with her. Tap tap. His footsteps echoed the chamber as he approached her. Lady Fenitos, I apologize for the time it took me to finish with this. Now, shall we? He asked her with a subtle smile as the woman eyed him with dignity. It was time to see how thorny a rose could be. Chapter 28, The Rose of Faradras. Sitting in front of the gorgeous woman, Bann eyed carefully her delicate yet regal features of the red-haired woman, who also did the same with him. The air between them was charged with an unspoken tension as they sized each other up, each aware of the other's allure. You should know by now that I wish to take you as my woman, Bann said directly. He wasn't one to doubt around women. If Aurora was shaken by his words, she didn't let showcase it as her posture remained in the same elegance and gracefulness while she nodded. I have indeed thought of that. She paused briefly as she then continued, but after seeing so many young maidens be presented at you, I also thought that you might no longer hold such ideas. Bann couldn't help but smile while he tilted his head sideways with a playful look on his face. How could that be? One thing is the need for political stability and another one is the matter of wants. And you, Miss Fenitos, are someone I dearly want to my side. He told her truthfully as he eyed her reaction. Yet she remained with her same stoic face as she asked, is that so? She then furrowed her brows as she seemed to recall something while saying, pardon me if I am mistaken, but we have never seen each other nor spoken before. Are you perhaps mistaking a want for lust? Seeing her raised eyebrow and inquiring gaze, Bann let out a smile while he nodded. That's indeed the case. But isn't want and lust the same thing? He asked while, as Aurora let out a snort in response. The difference lay in the choice of words. While one is more formal, it's also veiled in hypocrisy. While the other is more blunt, or impropriate, yet it's more sincere. She answered him. Reclining back on the seat while raising a brow, he asked her, it's sincerity what you want, Miss Fenitos? Aurora remained still as she acknowledged that Bann didn't finish. Because if that is the case, then I can be blunt and sincere as much as you want. His tone was sincere and stern. Aurora let out a faint smile as she said, honor me then. What do you wish to know? Bann asked as he retrieved back his glass of honey wine with telekinesis. Gulping down at his power, she asked with clear concern, could you defend this world truly? Taken aback by her question as he thought she would ask something in regards to her person, Bann couldn't help but see in another light to woman that seemed to veil the interest of the planet more than he first thought. Gulping down the wine, he answered her, you probably know better. What I have showcased is just but a speck of my power. Nothing that the Imperium can send us would endanger this planet. For that be assured. His tone carried an underlay of anger at the doubt she showcased. Biting her lips, she didn't follow the question she held and shook her head. After pausing briefly, she spoke, I know I have no decision over my fate by now, but I want to clarify a few things I wish to be known for you. She sighed deeply as she said the latter. Nodding his head, Bann motioned her to continue, not hurrying to correct her in regards to the notion she had of being already taken by him. I wish you lend me your strength to deliver my vengeance for those who had seen my mother's death. I cannot be at ease until I see the Adeptus Administratum being burned into ashes. As Bann heard her words, he couldn't help but sit correctly as his grin disappeared from his face while a serious frown replaced it. The head of the one responsible for not only this sector but the whole Ultima Segmentum shall be offered to her tomb. That's the only thing I ask in return for giving myself to you. There was clear rage, hate and pain behind Aurora's voice while Bann stared back at her crystal blue eyes that held a tint of red in them. You're asking for something big and serious, you know that, right? Bann asked her in a low tone. Aurora nodded her head while she fought back the tears in her eyes at the memory of her mother. She answered him, I am aware of it. But I promise you that I'm worth it. She held her chin proud while she stared at him. Reclining back in his seat, Bann started to ponder on his head while analyzing the pros and cons. The pros were only getting a faithful woman, at least for all he knew until now, while the cons were putting the whole attention of the Imperium on his head. Since when Saiyan backed down from a fight? Suddenly Bann asked to himself as he stared back at Aurora with newfound confidence. Letting out a smile, he said out loud, I guess I could get that guy head for you while on my way to Terra. He. His laugh echoed in the eviction chamber while Aurora froze on her spot, her eyes wide open as she stared dumbfounded at the man in front of her who uttered such words. Not minding her expression, he playfully said to her, I just hope you raise well our kids. You will be mothering kings and queens that will conquer plenty of stars. He then stood up and motioned with his hand for her to take it while he said with a mischievous grin, come on, let's get your pretty ass to the civil registry to put it in my name. Aurora, who had taken his hand automatically, couldn't help but be more dumbfounded while her cheeks flushed red. Although she wanted to say something to the thug in front of her, she couldn't bring herself to. Not after what he said. He would be the man who put himself at war for her to only avenge her mother. Just one man against the mighty Imperium of mankind. He's not just a man, he is my man. She thought to herself while Bann took her away. She didn't know if she could come up to love him, or what would come up from this. But she was sure of one thing, someone that was willing to reach such lengths for her was more than worthy to lay the claim of being called her man. Thus, under the starry sky of Faradras, Bann was on his way to take his first wife. A woman who would shake the entire galaxy and rule with an iron fist alongside the Saiyan warrior. Boom boom. The land trembled in Faradras, far away from Redentia. Craters were filling the wasteland where green bodies remained slain in the ground. Ashes were being scattered around the wind as the explosion vaporized hundreds of orcs. Large energy spheres of explosions were illuminating the night as the Imperial Guard gulped down with awe at the lone figure flying in the sky. Meanwhile, the small detachment of Battle Sister grasped their weapons tightly as they eyed with venom at it. Though different from the two figures they met before, its armor, spiky hair and abilities were indicators enough of her nature. She was another one of those Xenos that called themselves Saiyans. The servitors and cherubims around recorded carefully the abilities showcased while they sent the images. Swoosh boom. A larger explosion engulfed the thick of the orc column as they were vaporized from existence. Cries of Wyack resounded while they were drowned in the blast of explosions. The 9-foot-tall orcs were torn into shreds as their swarming numbers decreased at an alarming rate. Yet their eyes stared with frantic rage and battle lust at the lone figure flying high in the sky. Shots were fired from their scrap weapons, yet none managed to hit on her fast figure. Ramla, who had a large grin on her face, eyed the green-infested wasteland that extended for kilometers. There were plenty of enemies to let out some steam while she also flexed upon the weak humans. It's a shame that isn't a full moon yet. I would have loved to trail them back. She thought to herself as she let out more energy spheres while flying around at high speeds. Her eyes darted around in search of the more bigger and resilient orcs that were able to withstand more than one punch without being torn into shreds. While the key blast illuminated the ground, she was able to spot the hulking figure of one at 12 feet in height. There you are. Relishing on her finding, she launched herself forward at great speed towards her target. The orc knob that was overlooking the battlefield alongside his other companions couldn't help but be taken aback as the air left his lungs while an unimaginable amount of pain encroached on his being. Crashing against the ground and leaving a small crater, the orc tried to rise again. His eyes were blurry, yet his blood boiled while his instinct kicked in as he launched himself forward, amidst the pain that numbed his senses. Ramla, who was floating in front of the big orc, couldn't help but let out a grin while she eyed playfully the orc attacks, lowering her speed to match his as she started to punch him back while evading. The orc, who could only rely on his instinct and natural strength, was giving desperate attacks. With each punch that Ramla landed upon the orc body, the latter saw his speed decrease as muscles and tendons were torn into shreds. Bam! Seeing the orc about to fall, Celery stopped holding back and used her whole strength with her last punch, as a blurry mist of blood was the only thing that remained from her attack. The sound of her punch echoed around while she eyed the incoming boys and knobs. Feeling playful, she decided to entertain their wishes as she fought them in close-quarter combat, though without holding back. In a moment of a second, dozens of orcs were blown into mist as her punches destroyed everything. The knobs saw their bodies being blown into half where each punch landed as Ramla let out a laugh of enjoyment. Although the orcs couldn't compare to the feeling of battling against her companions, they were good targets to let out some steam of frustration. Each punch carried the anger she felt towards Aprit and his doings, while others the frustration she felt with herself for not speaking her mind when she wanted. Accustomed to hearing what her brother and Bann said, she started to realize some of her flaws as she compared herself to Celery, who always made herself heard unlike her. I should have told Aprit that I didn't want him with other women. Her smile faded as some tears gathered in her eyes while her punches were now being delivered with sheer rage. Her speed increased as the orcs were unable to even react or see what killed them as she moved through the wasteland at a speed that escaped everyone's senses. I should have told them that I wanted to decide who my partner with and when should I have my kids. Tears streamed down the face of Ramla as the landscape was being affected by the strength of her fist. Dozens of orcs are being destroyed with each fist. I don't want to do what you want. She let out a scream as a key sphere surrounded her while expanding at great speed, disintegrating both orcs and the land. In a matter of a second, a bubble of at least 1 kilometer in diameter formed around Ramla while she huffed in anger. Her tears vaporized as her key burst outward. Closing her eyes, Ramla tried to calm down herself. She wasn't able to hear anything. You can do what you want, my child. If you ever doubt, just look at the moon and remember your mother will always love you. The words she often heard before sleeping resounded in her mind. The face of her mother when saying such words filled her heart with warmth, while at the same time, she felt a void. Opening her eyes while giving a long look at the moon, Ramla let out a deep breath as she started to float again in the sky. Stealing herself back, she resumed her task as she continued cleaning the land from the orcs under the wary gaze of the Imperial Guard. Emotions were blooming on the surface as the full moon approached in Faradras, bringing with it the deepest feelings of each Saiyan. Ramla was about to not only change her fate but the whole squad. Chapter 29, Assumptions. Planet Faradras, Acteron Sector, Ultima Segmentum. 991.m41. The dawn of the third day after the Imperial Guard descended into the feudal world of Faradras was one that brought with it changes and an uproar. The plain and normal lives of the many inhabitants of this world were thrown upside down while they heard the many spokesmen announcing the changes that were decided the night before. Although few knew the truth of who was now ruling the whole planet, many couldn't help but wonder what was the reason behind it. Still, their lives continued, so after acknowledging what was expected, the majority remained expectant to more information. Others saw the opportunity to make a coin for themselves as they joined in the efforts to start building roads, bridges, and whole villages from the ground. Those that weren't comfortable with their previous lives saw this as a chance to do something. The kids that could always be found on the fields playing around and cloud gazing were now called into the towns and city squares to be tested and wrote down their information, mostly to be later on put into the new schools that were about to be built and open. More scholars were called into the cities and nobles' houses as they were informed of the assignment they would be doing in the meantime, as they wouldn't only replicate the technology, but advance the society of Faradras in every aspect they needed. However, if there was someone, or better said, something that was left in the dark amidst the whirlwind of changes, that was the ecclesiarchy. Although Bann recognized their threat, he couldn't short the need that the local population would undoubtedly demand. Not when the ruinous powers could make a fest on the confused minds of the many inhabitants of this planet. Thus, the preachers eyed with wary eyes the things going around them, while they smelled the undergoing current, already preparing themselves for whatever was about to come. Though none in Faradras were more stirred than the various noble houses in the capital cities and grand cities, with Bann announcing his engagement with Aurora Fenitos in Redentia, hastening the local nobles to fight over his last remaining spot as wife. Aprit, who took 4 concubines in Flandria, another capital city that housed many noble houses, and spent 2 entire days filled with debauchery. And last but not least was Ruku, who last night also announced the 2 wives he would be taking for the time, and throwing a feast alongside their families, in a banquet away from the eyes of his companions, thus announcing the start of the Saiyan dynasties, at least from the side of the males, as Ramla returned at midnight and went directly to her bed, looking in a loop at the only message that her mother left her, while Celery spent her night mingling with the population, hid in robes with keen ears to hear what made Bann so fascinated with the humans, and with the only results of her taking a liking to the honey wine, and working as a thug for the tavern keeper as payment, grumbling in annoyance while kicking away the poor souls of those who felt drunk. By the time morning hit the Saiyan base, Bann was finally again in the place as he chatted with Cielo about the female guardsman he kidnapped, while Ramla was slowly waking up. Tap tap. The light footsteps of Celery entering the base made both Bann and Cielo look in her direction while they saw the lavender-haired girl throwing aside her robe while muttering some words under her breath. Stupid human, how dares he to try and pat my head while saying I am a lowly? She grumbled while clenching tightly her fist. I am not a lowly, I am yet to grow up, she said to herself while letting out a sigh. She then looked up at the 2 figures that were eyeing her and asked with a plain tone, what are you looking at? Bann, who was in a good mood after getting a beautiful woman to call his wife, gave her a grin while saying good morning to you two, and nothing, I was checking out who'd come. There are things I need to speak with you all about after all. Celery couldn't help but furrow her brows and ask with exasperation, there's always something you want to talk about with all of us, just use the scouter and that's it. Ugh. She made a beeline towards her room, not before giving a venomous glare to Cielo, who remained stoic beside Bann. The latter seemed stunned after hearing Celery's words and couldn't help but scratch the back of his head as he exclaimed out loud, oh, I forgot I could do that, god damn it, I'm stupid. He then clicked various times on his scouter until he connected the device with his whole squad. Rasping his voice he announced, good morning to y'all, although I wanted to announce this to everyone in person, the current circumstances don't allow it, although on another note I wish to know where are you two Aprit and Ruku? He asked with a frown on his face. He hasn't seen Aprit in 3 days ever since he stayed back in that city, while Ruku flew away from the station after rejecting his order. Still, that is for later. What I want to tell you all is that I have already picked my first wife and I am on my way to pick the next one alongside other concubines. When Bann said such words, he heard something breaking in an adjacent room where Celery walked to a few moments ago. Since the plan is already in motion, we need to now ensure our continuing. Please come here later on so we can discuss further how we'll be organizing from now on. That's all. Turning off the scouter he let out a sigh, while he snapped his head towards the sound of 2 people approaching. As if a stampede was on its way, Ramla and Celery appeared on the arched door that led to the room with bloodshot eyes. Who's the slut you've taken as wife? Celery inquired with hate in her tone. How is that you already picked your wife? Meanwhile, Ramla screamed almost hysterically, her puff red eyes showcasing she spent the night crying. Seeing the tempestive attitude of both females, Cielo stood up and moved away from Ban while the latter gestured with his hands as he exclaimed with a gentle tone, chill out. Yet when both Syans remained on their spot with worse looks on their faces, Ban started explaining, first of all, there should be a congratulation on your part for my engagement. That's rude of you both. His words seemed to add fuel to the fire as Celery Key spiked up and her muscles tensed, seemingly ready to pounce at Ban. Quickening his explanation, he said, now, we have already spoken about this. Since Ramla seemed so enraptured by Aprit, we thought with Ruku she would be staying with him. It was now Ramla's turn to have her key exploding as veins appeared on her forehead while tears streamed down her face. And who told you two to decide for me? Am I no person for you to even bother asking? She exploded while she in a moment appeared in front of Ban, grasping him from his spandex. Seeing her so distressed made Ban stunned. Throughout all the years he saw her being so close with Aprit that not only him, but Ruku too thought they would have ended up together. With honest intrigue, he asked her, don't you like him? I thought you wanted to be with him. His onyx eyes stared directly at hers. Ramla lowered her head as she closed her eyes with pain while muttering, I did, but he didn't like me back and wanted someone that was away from his grasp. When saying the latter part, she quickly glanced at Celery, making Ban even more dumbfounded. Letting a sigh, he brought both hands towards Ramla's shoulders as he told her with a sincere tone, I am sorry Ramla, I should have asked you this question instead of assuming. This kind of thing won't happen again. Ramla still maintained her head lowered while she simply hummed an in response. You can take whoever you want as your husband or wife. I will speak with your bro. He couldn't continue with his words as Ramla raised her head and looked at Ban with furious eyes while she exclaimed, you think I want a worm as a husband? Her eyes were lit with the fire of indignation as she continued, I expect at bare minimum someone that could stand even a hug of mine. With those words, she let out Ban as she huffed away in annoyance, passing Celery, who looked at her with curiosity. Yet before leaving she turned around and said to Ban, congratulations on taking a useless human as wife. I hope she doesn't die while you fuck her and get the kids you want. And then disappeared from everyone's eyes, leaving behind a frowning Ban and a more appalled Celery, who seemed pleased with Ramla's choice of words. You should raise your standards, Ban, if not me it should have been Ramla instead of a human, Celery said while resting on the doorway as she looked at Ban with a smug expression on her face. He closed his eyes as he released the sigh he was containing, falling into the poorly made couch in the room. You both don't seem to understand what kind of situation we are in. He raised his head as he stared at Celery, pointing his finger at her. You for example won't accept anyone who is beneath you. Even if I were to kneel right now in front of you, you wouldn't hear a word and simply kick me away. Hearing his words, Celery's smuggish face faltered while her cheeks flushed, yet she answered to him, why don't you try it? Although her face was red as a tomato, she challenged him. Ban had to give a double look at her while he listened to her words. Raising on his feet he asked her warily, would you? Staring at his eyes, Celery felt like dying inside while outside she simply said, try it. He slowly walked towards her, and just when he was about to get on his knees, he received a kick from Celery, who shouted at him, you fool. If you have tried it before I would have gladly accepted. Now you have a woman. She then eyed Cielo at one corner and spat out with rage, and who knows how many more you are thinking to add. She then turned around and walked away, without saying another word. Ban, who received the kick on his chin, couldn't help but clutch on the place while he let out a swear, God damn it. Cielo, who looked at everything that happened with strangeness as she couldn't understand a word, quickly approached Ban while she asked with apprehension, have you been hurt? Did she hurt you badly? Feeling the warmth and soft hands from Cielo on his face, made Ban stare at her with appreciation while he let out a sigh and answered, I'm okay, don't worry. It hurts more the pride than anything. Cielo still eyed where Celery kicked him with concern while she helped him to get on his feet. Though I'm oblivious to what you've been discussing with those two women, you shouldn't let yourself be treated like that. She told him with a soft tone while she stared dazedly at his face while still caressing his jaw with her hands. Looking down at the battle sister and her caress, Ban couldn't help but let out a grin while answering to her, if I get to be treated with your care like this, then I wouldn't mind the rough handling of the Syans. As Cielo looked at his grin with flushed cheeks, she couldn't help but retrieve her hands as she noticed her actions. Yet to be stopped by Ban, who said to her in a low tone, hey, don't let your treatment be done halfway. His grin never disappeared. It was nice after all to receive the soft care of a beautiful woman. Chapter 30, Overlords. As the morning passed by and the two Syans that had awoken from their feast heard the call, they made their way back to the Syan base. After all, some things needed to be said and cleared. This time, Ban received both Syans outside as he spent his time eating, chatting, and trying some techniques while Cielo eyed him with attention. Looking over the two figures approaching, Ban let out a snort while he exclaimed, here, at last, these two finally came. While he cleans away the sweat from his forehead. Tap tap. Bam. Eyeing the two figures that showcased clear differences in height, that almost looked comically, Ban held out his laugh as he said to them, good morning, sleeping beauties. Where the hell have you been? Ruku eyed Ban with solemnity as he asked with a scoff, doing the same thing as you, consolidating my wives and forging ties with two noble houses while promising other things to others. Ban nodded his head in approval while he crossed his hands in front of his chest. His eyes then made a beeline downwards at Aprit, who reached Rukul's waist as the kid stood in a kimbo position while a grin never left his face. I think I have already impregnated a handful of human women, hee hee. The rascal boasted while Bann couldn't help but raise an eyebrow while mocking him. You sure about that? Shooting blanks won't lead you anywhere, boy. There was a clear smirk on Bann's face. Ruku eyed Aprit with another smirk as he roasted the kid. Your balls didn't even fall and you already believe that you can breed humans? Ha. While Bann let out a loud laugh of mock, Aprit's cocky grin faltered as he glared at both Sion's adults with anger while saying out loud, you will see later on. I will have lots and lots of kids. Yet laughs were the only thing that answered him. Pointing his finger at Bann's and Rukule's, he defended his honor, and those women said that I was so virile and energetical, so stop saying crap. Bann almost choked on his spite as he went red from laughing while Rukule raised his head upwards, his eyes closed in laughter. Trying his best to walk towards Aprit, Bann was barely holding back his laugh as some smiles escaped from time to time. Swiping away one tear from his face, he patted Aprit's shoulder while he said in the utmost effort he put into sounding proud, I'm sure you did, kiddo. Now tell me, what have you spoken with those houses? Although Bann wanted to still make fun of the kid, time was running and he couldn't waste any more now that he had both Sions in front. Thus he heard with attention everything that the kid relayed, although it wasn't much since he had spent the 3 days banging some women, instead of coming back to further talk in regards to the plans. Nonetheless, Bann made sure to tell him what to order after returning. And with Rukule they briefed the kid on what he needed to know about the warp. Although he didn't seem to take it seriously, it didn't matter as the navigator would be forced to train them. We'll be competing, the ones that take their capital to advance faster and produce their first ship will be the ones who will rule this planet. Bann, after a while of speaking with the two, said to them. Aprit nodded instantly as fire gleamed in his eyes while Rukule eyed Bann with apprehension as he said, Woa, where does that come from? Staring at Rukule while sitting on the ground with a relaxed posture, he answered, we need incentives to later on conquer more planets. Each world would be the home of our dynasties. And I plan wholeheartedly to grab the first one for myself. Rukule remained silent for a moment as he contemplated Bann's words until he opened his mouth. But isn't counterproductive to do such a thing this early? Although we are powerful, there are only 5 of us. And you've seen how dangerous the warp is. Bann nodded at the fair point that Rukule made, yet he remained with a toothy grin as he responded, that's why we need to start preparing the first batch of our descendants. They would be the ones who will defend the planet alongside each one of us. If help is needed, we can always communicate with our scouters and we'll be there in a while. Bann wanted one thing foremost, and that was to make them Sions enough in small numbers to at least hold back the various forces that inhabited this galaxy, while they slowly grow their numbers. Staying on one planet in this universe was a bad idea, as there were things that could easily wipe them out, even with all their strength. And in this way, he could also diminish the possibility of unrest among them all for vying for others' belongings. With each holding a world of their own, their hands will be full and satisfied. But don't let's go ahead of our current circumstances. I need you two to come back here at least for a couple of hours to train for the warp, then you can do what you want in those capitals. Their defenses would be in your charge alongside the supervision of the Imperial Guard. Bann stated with a serious look. Aprit, who seemed ready to leave the place, asked, is that all you wanted? Only to receive the narrowing eyes of Bann as he admonished him, hold your reins off, we need to go up to train with that guy. I'll be calling the other two. Cleaning off the dust from his armor, he disappeared from the place while he called the other 2 Sions inside, leaving Rukule eyeing Cielo with a raised brow as he asked, hey you, so you'll be staying here with us? Cielo nodded her head with graciousness as she held back the scowl on her face as she eyed the Xenos. Indeed, I have reached an agreement with Lord Bann to remain at his side. Lord Bann? Aprit said in amusement. Meanwhile, Rukule looked surprised and couldn't help but ask with intrigue, and why would that be? You're going to be his concubine or something? Sensing her key, Rukule thought she would make a fine mother of mighty kids. Holding back some xenophobic remarks, Cielo tried to sound gentle the most she could. That's none of your business, Xenos. Yet she failed miserably as Rukule glared at her with a pissed look. Silence permeated the area until Bann appeared back with the 2 Sion females, with Ramla, who was unable to look at Aprit and stayed away from him. The kid seemed oblivious to it though. You know the drill, we'll be back ASAP, said Bann to Cielo as they soon took off. After giving the instructions to Aprit to hold his breath, they entered the space station. While the ex-slaves still looked bad, the atmosphere in the place didn't seem oppressive or grim, as smiles could be seen on some fellas. Yet they all looked at the figure of Bann with respect, fear, and reverence as he made his way through the corridors. Everyone knowing the identity of the individual who killed the planetary governor and his forces, alongside the ship's navy officers. As Bann walked into the royal chamber, he was welcomed with the sight of Inquisitor Gannicus, who was held into the walls with keychains, and standing in front of him Augusta was with another woman who also was hooded and holding a staff. As they turned to look at them, Augusta and the woman looked terrified as if they got caught. Yet Bann had none of it as he spoke loudly as he stared at the hooded individual with a suspicious look. Go fetch that old man, we're here to train. She quickly scurried away as she did as he ordered while Bann eyed Augusta with a raised brow. Who is her? This is the second time that I've seen her at your side. As Augusta tried to form a credible alibi, the other Sions made their way to find a seat on the couch while others picked something to eat from the tables. She's our astropath. I have already sent a message to our enclave. Soon they would send another fleet to cease your heresy and purge that planet you have doomed. It was Gannicus who spoke and revealed the woman's identity, making Bann nod his head in appreciation for the man's cooperation. That would be indeed burdensome, he pointed out while he cursed in his mind for his lack of action before. Eyeing Augusta with a plain look, he whispered to her as he passed by, "You'll be punished later on," making the woman shiver at his words while she gulped down in acceptance. Bann on the other hand went to sit on the couch beside Ramla. Aprit, who was munching down a piece of meat, crouched in front of the Inquisitor as he asked with an intriguing look on his face, "Who's this fella? His armor looks fine." Gannicus eyed the Xenos with a wary look, feeling the same pressuring feeling exuded from the seeming kid as the others. "I just hope the Death Watch is called too, or else I fear we would only waste resources against these vermin." Gannicus couldn't help but gulp down his saliva while thinking to himself. Just one of them was necessary to make an entire regiment look like nothing, and his whole cadre was reduced to bystanders who couldn't do anything to protect him. A big shot that can summon important people into this fray. "He is worth more alive than death for our cause," answered Bann while letting out a sigh. "And why is that?" Aprit didn't seem happy with the response and inquired about it further. Letting out a yawn, Bann explained, "Instead of training, we'll have to spend days or even weeks to secure that this planet isn't blown up by his lackeys, and even if we manage to destroy them, there's still more of them yet to come once we kill him. So it would be pointless to do such a thing, and instead, we'll use him as a bargaining chip." Aprit seemed contented with the answer as he walked around the room while eyeing everything with curiosity, as this was his first time in the place. That was until a few minutes later the Navigator made his way inside alongside the astropath. The old man looked rather angry at being called, yet he remained silent while he stood in front of the Syans. Seeing his devious figure, Bann let out a grin while saying with a joyful tone, "How dia, old man? We're here again to train again." The man's eyes were heavy and weary as he looked at the group in front of him. He seemed to be lost in thought, his mind preoccupied with something else entirely. Despite the group's friendly attitude towards him, he did not respond in kind. Instead, he simply nodded in acknowledgement, his face devoid of any emotion or expression. It was clear that he was not in the mood for idle chit-chat or small talk, and that his mind was elsewhere. Seeing him not responding, Bann asked while scratching his head, "Oh, I forgot to ask your name, old man. How do I call you?" His question piqued the intrigue of Augusta too, as she was also ignorant of the man's name. The oak voice of the man slowly opened as he simply answered, "You can call me Darth Bane." Bann looked flabbergasted at the Navigator, unable to process the name he sprouted. He was called like a Sith Lord from Star Wars after all. Shaking his head sideways, he motioned to his companions as he ordered Bane to train them all like he did yesterday, much to the chagrin of the man. Thus, the entire of the royal chamber was thrown into the illusions and psychic abilities of the Navigator while the group withstood not only the horrors from the warp but also its chaotic nature. And although they were somewhat prepared, it was still a tough time for the 5 Syans who had to let out their ki to overcome the pressure and erosion that the warp produced. It wouldn't be until 1 hour later that Darth Bane wasn't able to resist any longer and called the training of, his mind numb as the constant usage of his abilities drained his body while taking a toll on his mind after hearing the whispers from the daemons. Yet it was on time as the space station was thrown into chaos as the blare of alarms rang throughout the corridors, while the escort ships were preparing to detach themselves. Dozens upon dozens of freed slaves moved alarmed through the station while carrying ammunition and other necessities. The sensors had seemed to pick up the signal of a Xenos ship entering the system, making Bann and the rest look up at the hologram of the system map with alarm and intrigue. It seemed that fate knocked on their doors. Chapter 31, Guests from Afar. Faradra's system, Acteron Sector, 991 41st Millennium. For a journey made into the webway, Eurocane and Eileen felt that their travel was one filled with misgivings. Not only were they sent into the wrong path, but also have spent the last few days wanderless as they weren't able to locate the so-called system they might found this Bann. Worse of all, they had to spend a lot of time speaking with Anna F to prevent the woman from getting anxious about her first time traveling outside their craft world. Even the disciplined and trained Eurocane was losing his patience in their situation. And it didn't help that their ship was a small one. "There are ships docked on that planet station, do you think it may be him?" The voice of Eileen sounded as she eyed the screen in front of her. There, a massive blue planet, with its gleaming surface and various moons, was visible in the distance. The stars around it twinkled and sparkled, adding to the beauty and splendor of the scene. Zoomed in closer on the screen was fixed the image of a colossal station of Imperium architecture. The stunning structure was adorned with intricate designs and patterns that added to its grandeur. A massive ship, along with 2 smaller ones, was docked at the station, which only added to the magnificence of the overall view. Eurocane stared also in that direction as he eyed the information on screen with hesitation. He knew that if he made a mistake, not only it would seal their fate but their race as a whole. Thus, with a heavy sigh and closing his eyes, he pressed his finger into the keypad while codes of information started to fill the screen. The translation from their mother tongue to both Low and High Gothic was underway as Eurocane started writing down a message to be briefed into the system communication channel. The seconds seemed to pass by with more tension as Eileen saw the 2 smaller ships undocking and veering towards their position. Alarmed by the sight, she told Eurocane with urgency, "Do it faster, those ships are heading towards us." Yet only to receive the patient semblance of Eurocane, who eyed the message on screen with resolution. If this wasn't the right system and they met their demise here, then that would be what fate wanted. The ship sensors were starting to beep in alarm as weapons were locked in their position. Eileen, who saw this with a pale face, decided to take hold of the ships as she moved away from the firing range of the Imperium vessels while she hoped for the message to reach Bann. Luckily for both of them, Anna was still sleeping and she didn't add more chaos to the situation. As the ship engines moved the ship through the system, minutes passed by, and something took Eileen attention. The two ships that were moving in her direction were moving abnormally. Instead of moving forward, they seemed to retreat from their position at great speed. As she gazed at the image on her screen, she felt a sense of curiosity take over her. She decided to take a closer look and zoomed in on the picture. As she did so, she was left utterly flabbergasted by what she saw. Two tiny figures were in front of the massive ships, seemingly pushing back the two gigantic vessels with their bare hands. What was even more baffling for her was one thing: both figures were outside without any sort of suit or protective gear. They were wearing only a mask to cover the lower part of their faces. It was an incredible sight that left her in awe and wonder. What in the name of our ancestors is that? She heard Eurocane muttering under his breath as he also looked at the image with dismay. Unable to retrieve her gaze from the image, Eileen couldn't help but ask out loud, are those really humans? Without her notice, she stopped the ship on its spot while they eyed with marvel at the display of strength while the two vessels were pushed back towards the station once again. All of this at a quick speed at that. It wouldn't be until the tilting message on one corner of the screen was too visible that Eurocane touched it and a message translated into their language made itself shown. Monkey slang: greetings travelers, there's indeed an individual called Bann in this system. He's the current ruler of the Faradras system alongside the Saiyan's unintelligible. He will receive you in the space station. Lesser expression: sorry for the disturbance. Various spaces didn't make sense in the translated message as it wasn't able to pick up the slang used by the person who wrote it. Yet for Eurocane and Eileen it was enough to let out some of their tension while they sighed in relief. Although many were the questions they wanted to ask, those could wait until they met the human in person. Move towards the station. I'll wake up Anna, Eurocane ordered as he walked out of the cockpit. While Eileen flew the ship with determination, it was time to meet with the person who would change the fate of their race as a whole. With trepidation she saw the figure of the space station getting bigger and bigger as she closed the distance. Her eyes wandered to the various weapons aimed towards their ship, yet seeing no one firing at them made her gulp down in nervousness. After spotting the location for them to dock their ship, she swiftly maneuvered around the hangar bay as Eurocane and Anna returned to the cockpit, to see the whole process with perspiration. Once the ship stopped and she docked correctly, she stood up from her seat as Eileen's eyes met Eurocane's solemn face. It is time, he simply said while Eileen nodded back at him in confirmation. Do you think they will have a bath here? I haven't showered these days. Yet Anna's words made both Warlock and Warrior feel their faces falter as they both let out a sigh of resignation. Be mindful of the situation, Anna. This could be dangerous. Eileen tried to warn her with a stern tone that made the blonde-haired Eldari healer act more meek as she nodded. Making their way outside while grasping their helmet below their arms, they eyed with trepidation the door getting open. As the doors pressurized, they were able to spot a few figures standing outside. Standing up in a large corridor, there they were met with the visage of 6 figures of different height, physique, and demeanor. Shocking the Eldari for their appearance, as their spiky hair, strange armor, and the confidence they exuded were beyond what they could imagine from humans. Yet the thing that took their whole attention was that the 2 tallest figures were the ones that pushed back the Imperium's vessels. For a moment silence encroached the corridor as both sides eyed each other as they examined. The beeping sounds of the Saiyan scouters were the only sound as different lectures appeared on the 5 scouters, making the eyes of Celery and Ruku rest upon the Warlock Eurocane, as his lecture was a surprising one. Karas being his voice, the second tallest and the one who was leading in the middle was the first to raise his voice, as he opened both arms wide while saying in low Gothic, welcome to our humble abode, foreigners. Were you looking for me? Eurocane, who was the one that has been studying the lesser language until now, was able to understand some of his words, yet he was unable to convey an answer as he shook his head and spoke in his mother language. I'm grateful for meeting you, though it's a shame I cannot communicate with you in a normal mean. Allow me to convey the meaning of these words. As he said that, he used his psychic abilities and spoke directly into the mind of Bann. Bann's body stiffened as soon as he heard a voice in his head, his senses immediately on high alert. But as the words of the Warlock reverberated in his mind, he relaxed his posture, nodding his head in acknowledgement while crossing his arms in front of him. We have come from afar in search of you, Bann. Our seers have seen your presence being interconnected with the Eldari fate. Eurocane gesticulated with his hands as he looked at the onyx eyes of the man in front of him, both sharing the same height. Bann raised an eyebrow at the words spoken by the space elf and couldn't help but be a little bit stunned inside. He was aghast at the notion that the Eldars had already spotted them. I cannot say I'm not surprised at your sudden visit. What made you 3 venture this solitaire into this system? What is your business with me? Bann answered the Eldar with caution. Though his interest was piqued by their appearance, and his curiosity, he was also aware of the nature of this race. Thus he took a more direct approach to them. Eurocane puffed his chest while he calmed down his own ego at the response given by the human. From this exchange not only his fate but that of his craft world was at play. As such, he couldn't let his own Eldari pride to thwart any chance of endangering the success of their mission. With resolution on his mind, Eurocane gestured with his hands towards Eileen and Anna as he announced, we were tasked by our Farseer to serve you. The warrior Eileen would guard you to the best of her abilities, while the healer Anna will heal any of your wounds. As Eurocane spoke at Bann's mind, he was unaware of the current shock that turned Bann's mind upside down. As he eyed the blonde Eldar who wore simple clothes instead of the armor that the other two wore, he couldn't help but tremble in excitement at the heaven-sent help that was now standing in front of him. The cause of his concern and lack of improvement all this time was about to be resolved just like that, without him needing to do anything but hear whatever the Eldar wanted. With a drumming chest, he continues hearing the words of the warlock, and I will provide you with guidance and knowledge you may need, while serving as a link with our craft world and you. And while Bann was barely stopping himself from jumping into happiness, Eurocane was carefully thinking his words. The other individuals were ignorant of the exchange of words between the two as tension continued to rise. Celery held a deep frown as she observed the two pointy-eared females with confusion and wariness, as their ki was abnormally high in comparison with regular humans, while Ruku eyed with carefulness the tensed and anxious figure of Eileen, unable to understand what these individuals wanted. Augusta was looking at the Xenos with a heavy frown as she contained herself from not only cursing at their presence but also using her psychic abilities to destroy mankind's enemies. Are humans like him? Meanwhile, different from anyone else in the room, Annaeth was eyeing Bann from head to toe with clear interest as she felt his gaze on her. As she focused on her path from a young age, Annaeth wasn't able to enjoy the experience that some of her peers delved into when they had the chance, as she felt her time was better spent in deepening her knowledge of runes and healing, rather than flirting around with other youngsters. Yet, now after spending many days outside her craft world and having time to think about other things that weren't healing and taking note of the patients, she was now for the first time carefully inspecting the opposite sex, even though if they were from a lesser race such as humans. In such a manner, the first contact between the Eldars and the Syans was made, one that would change not only the fate of the two races, but alter the destiny of countless worlds. Chapter 32, True Monkey. A tense atmosphere deepens in the royal chamber of the Faradras space station. The blue light coming through the glass of the large window reveals the serious faces of Syans and Eldars, while a silent conversation is ongoing between the representatives of both sides. Bann offers to take the talks to a more comfortable area once he exchanges pleasantries with Eurocane, who sweetens the deal under the promise of obtaining a healer. Observing Bann's sculpted and graceful face, both Eileen and Annaeth analyze the man in front of them, who exudes an oppressive and charismatic presence, albeit for different reasons. Eileen cannot hide her curiosity, as the man in front of her is said to be the key to saving her craft world along with thousands of lives and giving them hope against she who thirst. There is also the fact that the individual clearly proves to be not only powerful but also mysterious. On the other hand, Annaeth is struck by the stark physical contrast the human in front of her presents compared to the Eldar she always deals with. Physically, the difference is abysmal, and Bann's primitive, bestial, and even predatory appearance presents Annaeth with a kind of beauty she has never been exposed to. And with Ruku's square and roguish face beside Bann, it makes Bann's handsome face and attractive features stand out even more. She completely dismisses the kid appearance of Aprit. So Annaeth tries to keep quiet while Eurocane holds conversations with Bann, completely ignoring the other Syans in the room who look on curiously. So, let me summarize what you've told me so far. You come from the craft world Mimira, who has been having visions about me. Bann asks telepathically to Eurocane, who nods in response, and that they have sent you to place yourselves in my service. How would that help you? I mean, not that I could do without capable people around me, but I honestly don't see enough reason to help your people in such a case. Bann watches Eurocane's physical reaction as he lets him know his opinion. As much as he personally has some interest in the Eldar, his priorities are set on far greater things than simply wanting to help arrogant space elves. Eurocane sighs audibly as he nods his head at Bann's words, though part of him wants to tell him that there is no reason for not wanting to help a glorious race such as his own. Eurocane understands that he should not cloud his judgment for something as absurd as ego, and understandably so. This is why we are a token of good faith to reach an agreement between both parties while at the same time getting to know more about each other. It is Bann's time to nod his head at Eurocane's reply. Letting a grin appear on his face, Bann leans back in his chair as he replies, well, that seems like a better place to start. Tell me, what can you offer us? In the meantime, I can tell you what we'd offer, while you think about it. Of course, go ahead. Eurocane replies as he holds a solemn gaze beside Bann, his head thinking about the extent to which he might be able to offer things with his limited authority. You see, even if we're just getting started now, in a couple of years, we'll have a decent, high-tech fleet capable of reaching systems in a very short time and without needing to go through the warp. Bann's last words bring Eurocane's mind to a halt as his eyes shrink to the size of needles. A cold sweat runs down his back as his mind twists at the notion spoken by the man in front of him. His rationality refuses to accept such words. If Bann's ships don't need warp to travel, that means only one thing: he has access to the webway. His mind doesn't bother even to contemplate other possibilities, such as motors that could move multiple times the speed of light. Eurocane's lips go dry as he continues to listen after Bann pauses to accentuate his remarks. Besides having a fast and reliable fleet, there is the greatest advantage we offer us. Saying this, Bann opens both hands as he points to himself and his companions, causing Eurocane to take a closer look at the other beings in the room. You see, we are beings of immense power, capable of single-handedly defeating entire armies and repelling all manner of offenses. Our abilities could easily break through a siege your craft worlds may be suffering. Eurocane does not react to Bann's words, as he remains stoic. However, he does not deny Bann's particularity after observing his feat with a ship. What else he claims to be able to accomplish is very grandiose, and he certainly needs some proof to back it up. However, Eurocane does not point out this and lets Bann finish his words. You can then see something in what I said. If we need technology, we already have it. If we needed armies, that's what the 5 of us and our future children are already there for. What do the Eldar have to offer? Bann finishes as he looks at the elf with rapt attention, his full interest focused on whatever he is going to say next. Feeling Bann's inquisitive gaze and realizing the importance of his words, Eurocane looks calmly at Bann and speaks in his mind. We have deep knowledge of the warp's energies and how to defend against them. You humans, from what we have been able to gather, have been making efforts to render the vast majority of the population unable to use their abilities. For Bann, it is a good start, hitting on a real problem that not only the humans have but also him along with the Saiyans. We can offer you our guidance so that you can explore your latent potential without the dangers you would otherwise face. A slight smile forms on Eurocane's face as he says this. The knowledge of the use of psychic abilities that the Eldar possess is precious, and he does not doubt that even the basic teachings they impart to their children would be more than enough to fulfill any kind of bargain. We can also offer our combat support. Having someone who can have your back in case you are wounded is worth more than any wealth we can offer you. Eurocane notes Bann's gaze on Anna as he introduces her, so he chooses his words carefully. And once again, he notices a twinkle in Bann's eye as he says this, taking it for granted that they are in some dire need of healers. As always never failing with his visions, Farseer Nearlayak, Eurocane thinks to himself as he chooses his words to finish his offer. Casting his gaze briefly to the world outside the window, Eurocane offers as his last, and though you have strength and in the future an armada, it never hurts to have allies to count on. As proof of that, I can offer you help in furthering the development of your world, which looks like it is barely starting. Smirking at his words, Eurocane watches Bann carefully. The latter makes an appreciative expression at the Eldar's words as he nods his head. How the heck does this guy know we don't have jack shit? Bann, however, cannot help but curse in his head as he avoids showing his bewilderment. Not letting it affect him, Bann looks at the 2 female Eldar at Eurocane's side, and with a smirk, he says, that's a pretty good proposal. But let me tell you something that we are in more need of. Hearing Bann's words and seeing the smile on his face, Eurocane cannot help but feel that whatever he has to say, it won't be to his liking at all. With a heavy heart, Eurocane cautiously asks, and what would such a thing be? Letting a smile spread across his face, Bann begins, this time speaking to everyone in the room. You see, we are of a race of warriors and conquerors called Saiyans. The sudden voice in the heads of everyone present makes more than one jump in surprise, while Eileen brings her hands to her waist where her weapon is in pure reflex. Anna lets out a squeak of surprise as Eurocane looks with surprise and bewilderment at Bann, who continues. We are not human, we are far superior to them. Furthermore, let me tell you that the derogatory word you use to refer to humans, monkey, is more accurate with us. Saying this, Bann uncurls his tail from his waist, leaving Eurocane, Eileen, and Anna to watch in surprise at this. Ow, look, he really is a monkey man. Anna cannot help but exclaim with some cuteness as she observes Bann's bushy tail. Pausing briefly at the soft, soothing timbre of the Eldar's voice, Bann continues, we are but just those you see in this chamber, so we have been planning a few things to ensure our offspring. The more Eurocane listens, the more the horror on his face grows as a heavy knot forms in his stomach. Bann's words are unmistakably aimed at a fate he finds repugnant and dishonorable. Here in Faradras, we have established alliances with the noble houses in the purest and most trustworthy way possible, uniting our blood in marriage. Bann cannot help but smirk as he finally gets a reaction befitting the bad fame so often given to Eldars on the internet forums. Not only Eurocane but also Eileen looks with deep disgust and rejection at the implication Bann leaves in the air. Eileen's first reaction is to look at the primitive individual in front of her with disgust and fury. The mere fact that he would propose such a thing is something she finds degrading. Something that only those who walk the path of the lost could do or entertain such ideas. For his part, Eurocane remembers the Farseer's words and quickly changes the expression on his face. In this conversation, what he needs is pure, hard-nosed pragmatism for the sake of his race. With a heavy heart, Eurocane looks into Bann's eyes and asks, what do you want? Noting the solemn look and appearance of the Eldar, Bann understands that he needs to be clear and concise. That there is no room for games here, and he answers with severity. Something simple, to unite the Saiyan blood with the Eldari. Forging an alliance that avoids the famous ploys your race is known for, like abandoning temporary alliances for the welfare of other Eldar. Bann here is playing on the healer's goodwill. If Eurocane agrees to the deal, they will not only gain a great deal from all this but also have a hybrid offspring between Saiyans and Eldar, a race that is said to be perfect. The latent talent of such a mix is something Bann finds not only intriguing but also fascinating once the possible variables are taken into account. However, if the Eldar are unwilling to go through with the deal, Bann will have to kill Eurocane and Eileen while forcing the healer to serve him to exploit the Zenkai boost once and for all, with the time and hassle that would entail. And so, he watches Eurocane intently and anxiously, who is growing more and more serious and cold under Bann's gaze. Cautiously, Eurocane finally replies, while it is not something I can answer you now, for the implication of this is beyond my own will, I can commit myself to fulfilling this. Unable to fully accept such a request, Eurocane gives the most compromising answer he can think of while avoiding showing his deep displeasure. His mind only thinks of those Eldar in the Maiden Worlds he could convince to commit such an atrocity. Among primitives, they might find a middle ground of interest. The warlock concludes as he nervously watches Bann, who for a few eternal moments remains impassive with a flat face as he settles back on the couch. Seconds later, he lets out a smile as he announces to everyone in a relaxed tone, "No need to agree so soon, it's the first time we've met after all. How about spending more time with us and exchanging knowledge while we think of an answer?" His friendly and receptive response helps the tense atmosphere in the chamber to decompress. Eurocane nods his head as he lets out a sigh of relief. For her part, Eileen drops her weapon while still looking with some haste and concern at the Syans, unable to shake off the sickening image of them together with the Eldar, while Anna looks more seriously at Bann, contemplating his words while her eyes occasionally flick in the direction of Bann's pompous tail. Only she knows what thoughts are going on in her head at that moment. Bann just tells them to speak so we can scan their language with our scouters. It's extremely irritating to not hear you talking while just looking at each other. Celery cannot help but grumble at Bann as she hurries him to talk to the Eldars. Okay, I will. Bann lets out a laugh as he answers her. For the few words said by Anna and Eurocane, he finds their language fascinating and exotic. And just like that, they spend the next hours exchanging words and experiences as they get to know each other. Although it is only limited to Eurocane and Anna who ask and chat with the rest of the Syans, as Eileen holds her distance from them all, as she is slowly coming to the acceptance she is dealing with the true monkey, a slur that is about to change its meaning forever. Chapter 33, Afterthoughts. As the hours passed by, more words were exchanged while the Syans and Eldars got to know each other. Amidst the distasteful look from a good portion of the freed slaves and the station personnel, both Eurocane and Bann used this opportunity to gather information from both factions as they spoke with each other. From what Bann was able to gather, the craft world Mimira was relatively unscathed compared to the other ships he knew from the lore, and it seemed they had interesting units that could potentially devastate most armies in the galaxy. Not only that, but their craft world speciality was stealth, moving through the systems without being noticed by other races and so on, thus showcasing their capabilities to gather information from other factions with relative success while not threatening their people on the way. Although Bann was unable to get Eurocane to spill the beans of their craft world's current location, he was able to get the man to promise to take him there to meet in person with this so-called farseer, who was the one that brought Bann such a gift in the figure of Anna who surprisingly was relatively chatty and outgoing as she spoke telepathically with Ramla while they seemed to showcase their physical differences and other attributes, mostly with Anna eyeing with longing to touch Ramla's tail. Though the latter never left the Eldar to touch it, they seemed friendlier than one would first believe, while Eileen just remained to the side while she eyed them all with a certain wariness. Something which Bann didn't take personally as it was a reasonable attitude from her and spoke volumes, in Bann's opinion, of the woman's precautions, as the attitude of Eurocane and Anna was too friendly for Bann's taste, something which he wasn't accustomed to. After all, it was their sheer might that let them treat the Inquisitor, the Imperial Guard and the Sisters of Battle in such regard, leaving them powerless at their mercy and forcing them into submission to their will. Absolute power. So, when faced with their friendly attitude and diplomatic approach to Bann's cockiness, he was not only a little bit uncomfortable with his expectations, but having a hard time digesting what was happening. After all, it wasn't your everyday occurrence to receive a committee of 3 powerful individuals from a powerful race such as the Eldar who comes from a relatively unscathed craft world that holds their full power in comparison to other factions, and that they wanted to establish an alliance while serving him. Bann wasn't dumb most of the time, so he knew that if a deal was this good, it was because something else was ongoing under the table. Thus, after parting ways with the trio of Eldars, they accompanied back the Eldars to their ship. Although Bann offered them rooms to stay, he understood they weren't that much comfortable with the rest of the people in the space station, so they would rest for the time being on their ship. After confirming another meeting for the next day, Bann and the returned back to the royal chamber while they remained silent for a while, eyeing each other and lost in their thoughts. It wouldn't be until Ruku opened his mouth a few minutes later that he started, "I say we should accept what they'd offered. It's a good deal and that guy Eurocane seemed strong. His 900 units should be a good measure to understand that they could train us with the warp." Yet his words were met with a scoff from Celery as she asked him with incredulity, "Are you really calling someone that weak as strong?" "Yes, being in this place has warped our senses." As they listened, Aprit and Ramla couldn't help but agree with Celery's words, while Bann and Ruku shook their head, with Bann taking his time to explain to her, "You shouldn't underestimate the tricks these people may have." He paused as an idea came up to his mind, creating a grin on his face. "You know what? Tomorrow I'll ask these guys for a fight, at least to see what they're really capable of." His words were immediately met with nods and support. "Yeah, I want to beat that guy to the ground," Aprit said out loud. "If they want to ally with us, they should prove their worth." Ramla exclaimed as her eyes showcased a glint of fire as she lost herself in her thoughts. Meanwhile, Ruku nodded his head while giving a not bad look to Bann as he spoke, "That could also serve as a warning for them to not mess with us. We should use the chance to prove our superiority." Celery let out a sigh as she mumbled under her breath, "These guys, how can they get hyped up when those Eldars won't be able to even withstand a punch without holding back our strength?" The unknown capabilities that these Eldars showcase would be a good baseline for them to judge their standing in the incoming negotiations. And although they didn't need their strength, it was always welcome to receive help from capable allies, even though they were responsible for the creation of a chaos god. By just providing them with healers was more than enough to justify their alliance. As before, they would be able to create the healing pods, but it would pass a long time until they gathered the resources and required manpower to build them. But that wasn't all. These guys were naturally born talented psychers that could not only guide them to defend their minds from the warp and its fuckery, but also be able to effectively counter them with their abilities. If such a thing were possible, I shouldn't make more assumptions and just see it before thinking of something. Bann said to himself as he turned to look at Celery. You should also remember that they offered to train and guide us into the use of warp. With them alongside the Navigator, we'll have more places to learn from and discern what is right and wrong. That alone should be sufficient for you to accept this alliance. Celery eyed Bann with a raised brow as she asked him, since when did I oppose this alliance? I just pointed out that they aren't strong at all, and walked away. Before crossing the large door she announced, I'll be going back to the surface, humph. None of you is cleaning the pest or paying attention to it. Her words made not only Ruku but Aprit rise on their feet as they also trailed behind, leaving behind only Ramla and Bann, who looked at each other and shrugged off. The Imperial Guard should be fine, Bann thought to himself as he got more comfortable on the couch, until the promise he made to Cielo echoed in his head, and with a groan he cursed out, "Fucking nuns, I'll bring their asses back to Redentia and put them on their way back to the ships." Each of his steps echoing loudly through the metallic corridor as Ramla smirked at his parting visage. The dinner feast would be holy for her. Meanwhile, in another place in the space station, a meeting was also taking place. However, the participants were fewer in number and with more grim faces. At least 2 of the 3 hold a more solemn and grim look. They do seem to be more savage than the humans. And it wouldn't be rare for an unheard race that looks like humans to appear out of nowhere. Eurocane said with a hushed voice as he eyed Eileen with uncertainty. The latter nodded her head, though she looked tensed and anxious. For all they showed thus far, we can only glean for certain things tomorrow. She saw Eurocane nodding as she let out a sigh. Ah, is that guy really our hope? I just wish for the Farseer for once be wrong with his visions. Her eyes trailed off towards the window of their ship, as she looked over the dimly illuminated hangar bay. Her mind was still fixed on what the Monkey implied with his words. It was akin to asking humans to marry and breed with apes. Not only it was demeaning, but disgusting to even think about. Although there was always a crazy individual that would do such things. They seemed nice. Although I couldn't help but feel small in front of them. Even those kids looked far more intimidating than the Farseer. Anna's voice echoed through the ship while Eileen looked at her, flabbergasted by the content of her words. The healer was resting her body on the wall as she also looked outside the window with a glint. Their tails looked so puffy. How could you say those things? Eileen chastised Anna while she hushed her voice. They even have those tails with them? Haven't you seen the other humans? Not even they are like that. But her words were ineffective, as their tails were exactly what made them so interesting for Anna. Yet the healer didn't raise her voice as she continued gazing outside while daydreaming. And maybe that's exactly what made them stand out. Just remember, they seemed to hold on this planet. It was Eurocane who corrected the warrior. Just like you said, we should wait for tomorrow. Meditate and rest well. With those words, he retreated to his room while humming a chant to himself. He would also be meditating while seeking answers to his doubts. Meanwhile, both Anna and Eileen retreated to their room while the healer asked the other Eldar, "Why are you so negative about them? Didn't you hear the words that the Farseer said to us? He would help us to save our home." Boom. As if a bomb detonated in Eileen's head, she was left stunned by Anna's words as her mouth moved various times while trying to say something out. Yet nothing came out of it. Trying to relax, Eileen then did a breathing technique to calm her mind and find peace as the words said by Anna resonated in her head. The mission they were trusted was simply too important to let her own thoughts get in the way. Planet Faradras, somewhere near Redentia 991, 41st millennium. For the Palatine Ursula Creed, the mission she was given couldn't have been going worse. Not only did they have to face unsurmountable foes that were beyond anything she ever saw or heard of, but they were forced by them to even clean other enemies while they took control of the planet. All of it in a fair way as much as she knew, for they deposed the planet governor and took their place as the sovereigns of this world. Yet if that wasn't enough, they disregarded their fire while they took away not only one of their sisters but an inquisitor and acolyte with them. Never had she faced such humiliation and disregard before, and worst of all was that she couldn't do anything about it. For their weapons were unable to scratch their enemy and their abilities enabled them to destroy entire armies. It was beyond what a mission was supposed to face. Yet here she was now. I should have killed all of those idiot officers when they ordered me to do this thing. She cursed under her breath as she eyed the incoming wave of orcs in the distance. For the last days, all they saw were waves upon waves of orcs alongside some images of the Syans coming down to destroy in a couple of minutes dozens of thousands of enemies. As they give some relief to the demoralized Imperial Guard, they not only have to see their friends and companions be vaporized by their enemies but also get saved by them time and time again while being unable to do anything against them. At last, the call for reinforcements had already been made. It's a matter of time until his wrath descends upon those wretched beings. Ursula brought her hands to her chest as she looked into the sky with hope. For retribution was underway. They only needed to hold on for the time being until the stars rained down with the armies of the God Emperor of mankind, to retrieve back this world from the grasp of the witches. That was Ursula's hope, as only time would tell. Chapter 34, A Call for Help. Acteron Prime, Acteron Sector, Ultima Segmentum 991, M41. In the high, wide corridors of Acteron Prime's grim command center, servitors and scrivens, as well as members of the administratum could be seen hurrying anxiously through the corridors. As more and more messages arrived after being decoded by the astropaths, the terrible messages were brought before the main hall where the sector lord and his closest aides stood. As well as members of other branches of the empire, they listened with long faces and solemn countenances. An evil was once again hovering over the eastern fringe. Dozens of planets sent a message into the disformity, warning of a terrible enemy approaching, only for then to fall into absolute silence. With a serious face and a somber countenance, the lord of the Acteron sector, Benicio Argentum, listened to one of the many reports coming in. And before the message, these had reported strong earthquakes and other phenomena that occurred. A veteran warrior in noble garments and armor looked up at Benicio with a solemn face as he voiced his thoughts. My lord, we have been through this before. This is undoubtedly another Tyranid invasion. If we are to stand any chance, we must prepare beforehand. His words brought murmurs and gasps of surprise. Others were dismayed, while a few others raised their voices, shouting, "It's impossible! We have previously defeated their fleet." "That's right. It can't be that Demzeno's plague that caused it." "Don't talk nonsense." As more and more voices were raised in the complaints and shouts, the man that initiated looked directly at his lord while waiting for his response, not minding the shallow words that others were spouting. However, Benicio stared at the holographic map in front of him, on which several hundred planets could be seen with their respective names and data, while in the farthest distance, more than a dozen planets could be seen in gray. Looking clearly, a pattern could be seen, as if a wave was engulfing these planets one after the other. It was too coincidental to be another kind of attack. All the clues pointed to the same evil, one that Benicio feared he was unprepared for. The gears of his mind were running at 1,000 revolutions per second as he calculated what to do. Suddenly, however, the voice of another messenger broke through the murmur and din of shouting. In a raspy voice that chilled many, "Sir, an urgent message from Ocassus. They have detected enemies on a direct course to the planet. They are requesting reinforcements, my lord." The noisy room suddenly went silent as those present showed a serious face. All eyes were on the sector lord as he let out a snort. Observing the messenger, he nodded his head as he said, "I will inform you of our response shortly." With his words spoken, the messenger nodded and withdrew from the room. A woman's steely voice rose as soon as the messenger left the hall, saying with a fervor rarely seen among nobles, "Ocassus is a world of utmost importance to our faith. The Order of the Redeemed Flame is going to call all our missions and deployed sisters to answer the call, as is his will." Eyeing the Canonis Erica who spouted such words, Benicio nodded his head with a heavy heart as the forces of the Emperor's daughters were of extreme help to overcome the onslaught brought by the Tyranids. "My lord, the choir has received another distress message, this time from the Faradras system. They request extensive reinforcements and a fleet. The world has fallen to Xenos." Suddenly yet another messenger entered the room and announced loudly. Frowning, Benicio looked at one of his commanders and said with confusion, "Hadn't we sent an entire regiment along with sisters from the Order of the Redeemed Flame?" The commander stepped forward as he nodded. "That's right, my lord. Even an inquisitor was sent by the Ministorum to deal with possible heresy and demons." The man looked clearly confused as he said, "How can it be that in a few days they were defeated? Are you sure of the message?" Upon receiving the commander's question and look, the poor messenger stammered a little, "Yes, my commander, the message was received recently." The man could not finish his words when the figure of two individuals entered the room. Their attire and armor, as well as their accessories, indicated that they belonged to the Ministorum. "The messenger is correct, gentlemen. We have received a distress call from Inquisitor Gannicus, who is being held hostage. I come to request that we be provided with 5 companies of Asteroutes and 5 regiments along with an attack fleet." The strident and powerful voice of Inquisitor Jezebel struck the nobles dumb. However, the content of her request made Benicio rise from his seat as he looked at the Inquisitor with indignant eyes and a steely voice. "We can't provide you with those troops. The sector is under attack by Tyranids and we cannot offer more than necessary. A company of Praetors of Orpheus will accompany you, as well as a regiment of Imperial Guard, along with 2 armored regiments. All will be carried by a patrol fleet." Hearing the force he offered, Jezebel couldn't help but smile on the inside, while on the outside she showed an offended countenance as she said, "Is that only everything my lord is going to offer in exchange for defending the sovereignty of the God Emperor?" Her eyes glanced one by one at the nobles as she exclaimed, "Let it be clear that Lord Benicio Argentum has denied my request to repay our Emperor's divine wrath for such an offense as conquering his world and kidnapping the ones who protect humanity." To exacerbate her words, Inquisitor Jezebel turned and walked out of the room, leaving a grim Benicio who glared at her back with contempt. Letting out a sigh, the Lord of Acteron turned to the other nobles. "Our situation is critical. If we are to protect our worlds, we need to reinforce their defenses and stop the enemy's advance. Without the battle sisters to help, and without the troops he would like to have," Benicio continued the meeting as they planned a course of action. The Second Tyranid War was on its way, and the Acteron sector was entering the critical process of survival. A shadow loomed over the eastern fringe, and the eyes of the hive mind of the Kraken Tyranid fleet rested on Faradras, who were still ignorant of the terrible calamity that was about to befall them. Faradras System 991, M41. Bann's eyes fell on the hundreds of battle sisters pointing their weapons at his person. His stern, angry face showed the lousy humor he had as he hovered in the Faradras sky, both of his arms folded across his chest. You've already seen that your weapons are useless, why don't you save your ammunition and listen up? Bann asked them in a weary tone. However, his question was ignored as the red-haired Ursula glared at him angrily as she exclaimed, "Give us back Sister Superior Cielo, you damn Zeno." More shouts and aggravation were directed at Bann, who scowled and snorted. Leaving only an after-image, he appeared in front of Ursula and grabbed her by the throat. "What part of your head didn't understand that Cielo gave herself up in exchange for all of you to survive, huh?" His deep, reverberating voice shook his surroundings as Ursula stared wide-eyed at the Zenos. His firm grip was impossible to escape as she stared into Bann's onyx eyes. Ignoring the shouts of the other battle sisters, he continued, "Listen to me carefully. You are now going to head for Redentia. There you are going to take a ship that will take you to the space station, and you are going to get the hell out of here along with the useless Inquisitor. Do you understand?" Bann's cold eyes promised pain and suffering. Still, the Palatine Ursula glared at him as she exclaimed with an effort, "We're not leaving behind. Cielo, you fucking bastard." Bann's face quivered at the word bastard. Squinting his eyes and putting a tiny fraction of pressure on his grip, he saw that Ursula was unable to breathe as he said in a grim tone, "I'm an orphan, not a bastard. Imbecile." Releasing her and pushing her to the ground, he heard how Ursula gasped for air as she glared at him with eyes full of fury. A battle sister approached her as she helped her up. "If you need Cielo herself to tell you to get the hell off this planet, so be it. Follow me, you worthless piece of shit." Not bothering to turn her back, Bann turned and floated at a not-so-fast speed as he led them towards Redentia. Ursula, who was still glaring venomously at Bann's figure, saw in his words an opportunity to retrieve Cielo and gestured for her group to follow her. Chants and hymns began to ring out as some of the sisters raised their morale, preparing to fight once they had Cielo near them. Bann, who listened to the Gregorian chant that reminded him of the churches back on Earth, let his muscles relax a little as he enjoyed the pious chanting. The sisters' voices were varied but all sounded harmonious as they sang. Lowering his height a little, he waited at low speed for Ursula, who tensed her body as she looked carefully at Bann. Briefly observing Ursula's attitude, Bann let out a smirk as he waved his hand at her. "Calm down, I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions." Ursula looked at Bann for a moment sternly, but seeing that he was still moving forward, she continued marching on as she replied coldly, "What do you want to know, scum?" Holding back his smile, Bann turned his head slightly as he looked at the Palatine. "You are aware that your actions are against what the Emperor believes?" Hearing his question, Ursula was overcome with a call of fury and indignation at her heresy. Just as she was about to raise her bolter, Bann stopped her with telekinesis while with his left hand raised and his index finger, he gestured, "No, no, no. Remember that nothing you do is going to do any good. Try not to be an idiot and let's talk. Come on, it's not complicated to be someone decent." Ursula however forced her voice as she let out, "I will not allow you to utter such heresy and humbug in my presence." Her fervent eyes of faith sought to burn Bann, however. For her surprise she watched as he shook his head in denial as he said, "You see, the reason Cielo decided to stay with me is to try and make me see the truth that you think you have." Ursula felt confusion at those words, as Bann continued, "Between us, it's kind of pointless. I know far more about the Empire than you two will ever know in your lifetimes. Since I found her to be an interesting and inspiring person, I offered to let her stay with me so I could show her the truth of the Empire." Ursula's pupils dilated to the size of a pin as she heard his words, while an honest smile wielded across Bann's face. He turned his head and looked directly into Ursula's eyes. "In exchange for you and your sisters being able to leave this planet in one piece and without a scratch." Ursula's heart was squeezed in anguish, as her eyes were filled with pure and blazing rage as she heard the mocking tone of Bann. "You should be proud to have such a noble and pious person among your ranks, don't you think? You scoundrel! I promise in his glory that I will not rest until I set to blaze you in sacred fire." Ursula spat out with pure venom while she clenched her fist. "TCHT, TCHT, TCH." The sound of Bann admonishing filled Ursula's ear as he stated with confidence, "Neither you or an army would be enough to carry such promise, sister. Just forget about it and serve well to your emperor. I'm sure your skill and life would be appreciated elsewhere instead of finding your doom in my hands." When Ursula looked over Bann she expected to see another mocking face, yet she was welcomed with a sad but gentle smile while saying so. Stunned, she heard him saying, "Last, you and your sisters have endured a harsh life. Try and see the goodness of your actions, enjoy the gift of life and the chance given you by Cielo. I'm sure that would be more gratifying for her than wasting your life trying to avenge something that it couldn't be." With those words, and his gentle tone, he floated up in the air while only the solemn hymn from the battle sisters could be heard. Ursula, whose heart was filled with the blazing fire of faithful vengeance, felt something crumbling inside her while she eyed the Zenos. His almighty figure was forever imprinted in her mind, as she learned a lesson this day. Which one was it? Only she could tell. Chapter 35, Reunion. The west road towards the city of Redentia was stopped as a marching procession of sisters of battle headed into the city as they sang solemn hymns that made the onlooker peasants and merchants look with pious eyes as they prayed to their celestial lord for such glorious sight. Yet different from the feelings of the onlookers, the Palatine Ursula and Legadin Miriam's faces were grim. They looked forward while their minds were thrown into chaos. The words spoken by the Xenos have affected their mind. Not because he has a way with his words, but due to his nature and how he said to them. For they acknowledged that someone as powerful as him could easily destroy them without minding to reason with them. After seeing his parting figure fly towards his base to retrieve Cielo, whom he said had offered herself in their stead so they could leave this planet unscathed, made the veteran battle sisters feel troubled about what to do, for they cannot purge such heresy as their weapons weren't enough. Yet the Xenos did not seek confrontation or extermination, so they were at a loss in how to deal with the situation. As they made their way through the gates and walked into the muddy streets, Ursula took it upon herself to look around and inspect the faces of the population, seeing for the first time the awe and reverence that people seemed to feel at them. Something which she never noticed before, as she was one of the many who sang with all might in her lungs the hymns to inspire her sisters. Never once looked but them. Upon the sides of the street, her eyes landed on one of the kids' bright eyes that eyed them with an idolized glint. The words of ban resounded in her head, while a feeling of pride encroached on her being, making her puff out her chest and nod in salute to those who spared some words at them. There wasn't much noise, as the beautiful voice of the sisters singing out loud was a spectacle itself, one that many never would have the chance to hear again. As such, the battle sisters slowly but surely made their deeper into the city until they passed through the gate of the fortress. Boom! A thunderous clap made Ursula look up into the sky in reflex, although she knew that such sound was from Ban, who had most likely landed in the square, just as he said to her. Feeling trepidation and anxiety, Ursula walked a little faster, until she finally saw the figures of Ban towering upon Cielo. The latter seemed close to him as they seemed to chat while eyeing them. Although Ursula never spoke or spent time before with Cielo like her legatin did, she was a member of her order and thus, the Palatine was indebted to camaraderie with her. The hymns took a more warmongering as their formation spread out and circled the duo in the middle. Various onlookers were moving provisions and maintaining the transport ships, though now their eyes were fixated on the surprising scenery. The tension grew more and more until it was palpable as the songs quieted down as the eyes of many landed on the towering visage of Ban. Cielo's eyes moved through the mass of sisters that she both knew and was strange to, until she saw some of her more close sisters eyeing her with concerned eyes. Her sisters Karina, Anastasia, and Ameline were all together at the forefront behind Legatin Miriam, while they clasped tightly upon their weapons. She saw the warm affection in their eyes as their concern and anxiety were visible. Feeling Ban's hand on her back as support, she saw his chest moving while he took air, his voice resounding powerfully around. As I said to you all, your sister here has reached an agreement with me to allow you all a safe escape from this planet. Hushed voices sounded out, as Cielo felt the gaze of Ursula on her, quickly staring back at the Palatine who showcased a solemn look on her face. I do not wish to clash with the Imperium, there are more threatening enemies to face rather than waste blood and precious lives in a conflict that would only reach the same end, with us still reigning on this planet. As Ban finished, Cielo felt his hand on her back caressing her in signal for her turn. Breathing in deeply, she closed her eyes as she began. What he said is true. Those simple words made many gasps while Cielo continued. The Emperor has brought me beside Ban for a reason. One that I'll see it done and complete. This revelation made Ursula look at Cielo with a frown as she couldn't believe them, while Miriam seemed surprised as she was aware of the dreams that plagued her sister superior for months, and made Cielo rely on her to repent. It is him, Miriam thought to herself as she eyed Ban from head to toe. I do not wish to you all my sisters shed blood in vain when he wouldn't want it. Unable to hear her words any longer, Ursula let out a groan of annoyance as she looked at Cielo with a steel gaze. Have you gone mad? Do you wish to betray the Emperor and those who fed and raised you? Her cold voice made many shiver around her. Yet Cielo remained unfazed as she eyed the Palatine with resolute eyes as she shook her head. I would never betray the Emperor or give my back to all of you. You're my sisters and only fell behind the God Emperor in my heart. Although her sisters were moved by her words, the Palatine held none of it as she scoffed while saying, if your words were true, then you wouldn't be backing up that scum beside you, nor ask us to leave a planet at the hands of the Imperium enemy. Ursula grasped tightly her weapons as she waited for Cielo's answer. Sighing deeply, Cielo began to unfasten the upper part of her cleavage as she stated, it is the will of the Emperor that I am in front of you, just like was his will to show me Ban in my dreams. When she finished her word, those who were able to see her actions were left dumbfounded and in awe. Some even made the Aquila sign as they eyed the carved figure in the chest of Cielo. It cannot be possible, muttered Ursula with consternation and disbelief. Miriam also shared the sentiment as she too stood petrified on her spot. Lay on her chest and creamy skin, just above her heart lay the winged wings of the Emperor. I've been shot dead by one of Ban's companions. Yet he who grace us brought me back as my duty wasn't fulfilled yet. Cielo explained as she stared at Ursula with fierce resolution. This is why I'm sure that this man here is the key to the Emperor's many plans. With her hand, she motioned to Ban who was peeking at her boobs at the side while she continued, ignorant of his doings, and I will see his will be done, while I brought Ban into his light. Slowly she started to clasp back the ties around her cleavage while silence permeated the area. All eyes looking at her with disbelief and awe. Ursula opened and closed her mouth many times until she took a deep breath and walked forward. Her mind was in turmoil, yet her steps were firm. As she stopped a few meters in front of the duo, she eyed Cielo with a complicated gaze as she said, I cannot go against the Emperor's will. She then looked over at Bann and added, but I also cannot go against my duty. This world belongs to the Imperium and I cannot sit idle while Xenos took it away from his protection. Her words made Bann sigh in disappointment while Cielo shook her head sideways as she looked carefully at Ursula. It is will for this world be taken. For the threats that are to come will require their strength to protect mankind, even when they're no longer under the Imperium. When Bann noticed that the Palatine was about to speak, he said, first, what about this? You'll take those ships and you will retreat, but you'll report to your superiors about the planet being lost in our hands. This way you will fulfill your duty and also make sure to not interfere with your emperor's whims. Although his words were reasonable and made a fair point, the cocky grin when he said those words made Ursula want to put a bullet in his head. Yet she remained silent as she contemplated. Cielo, is it truly him who appeared in your dreams? Miriam couldn't help but ask as she also approached them, until her hand grasped Cielo's arms. Feeling the warm hands of her Legatin and mentor, Cielo felt a knot in her chest as she nodded her head while muttering, it's him, Legatin. I knew it since the first moment I recognized his voice. There was a slight smile in Cielo as she said those words. And when Miriam heard them, she couldn't help but give a quick glance at Bann, before she looked back at Cielo with amorous eyes. I guess we were both wrong back then. Miriam said in a low tone to Cielo to hear, making the latter nod as she added that we were. Making both share a smile. This is uncomfortable. Though Bann to himself as he eyed everything that happened with a solemn look, just do the Moa face and everything will be fine. He reassured himself while continuing to caress Cielo's back out of consciousness. We'll do as you said. The voice of Ursula brought everyone back of their reverie as she looked solemn. We'll gather everything we need and be on our way back to Ocasus. Those words weren't directed to Bann and Cielo but towards the mission, as they heard her words with attention and those that were in the back with confusion. For those that wanted to help your sister superior Cielo with her task, make yourselves known before we depart. That is. With those words, Ursula looked at Bann for a tense moment until she made her way out of the circle. Only she knows where she heads. As some saw their Palatine walking away, they quickly followed behind while others stayed back eyeing the blessed Cielo with awe as they chatted with each other. Using this chance, those who knew Cielo made their way towards her as the sister superior was circled by her sister and novitiates, barraging her with questions. How did it feel, sister superior? Did the emperor take you as his? How is it that you'll be staying? Sister superior. Trying to answer each one of their questions, Cielo felt overwhelmed until her own close sisters took it upon themselves and dispersed the others. Ending up with Sister Anastasia asking at Cielo, sister superior, will you truly stay back? Why don't you come with us? Her eyes were filled with anxiety as she looked between Bann and Cielo. Feeling that things were taking a more personal stance, Bann rasped his voice as he said to Cielo, I'll be going into the building for the time being. Take your time to speak with your friends. Cielo turned towards him and with biting lips nodded her head. Okay, I'll be waiting for you here. She mumbled while she felt his hands pressing her lower back in departure as he floated in the air, quickly making his way towards the palace. Seeing at Cielo looking at Bann's parting figure with a certain glint, Miriam, Karina, and Ameline shared a knowing look whilst Anastasia still waited for her response. Breathing in deeply, Cielo gave her best smile to her sisters as she said, I cannot go with you all, sister. I know my place would be at the side of Bann while I complete the Emperor's will. Anastasia didn't seem content with her words, as she opened and closed her mouth as if to say something, yet Sister Karina beat her. And that's exactly what you need to do? How come you never told us about this? Her tone was filled with sincere intrigue as she eyed her sister superior. Looking somewhat troubled, Cielo briefly glanced at Miriam, who gave her a knowing smile as she answered, I don't know exactly what I need to do, only that I was fated to meet him. As she saw the smiling grin appearing on Karina's, Cielo sheepishly added, and I've never told you because, well, it was more complicated and I was at a loss. Seeing the sister superior making a miserable attempt to explain her situation, Miriam came to her rescue while saying she was constantly troubled by her dreams and came to me for help. That is why you've never heard your sister superior speaking about it, as I told her to not. Looking back at their Legatin, the sisters nodded their heads in acknowledgement as they continued asking questions at Cielo, who enjoyed her close reunion with the sisters she was supposed to lead, knowing well that this moment might be the only one they would share after their departure, making Cielo's heart clench in pain as she captured their smiles, voices, and faces, while their happy memory was forever imprinted in her mind. This was the family she would be leaving behind, to completely embrace the sacred task that the Emperor gave her. The Emperor wills it. With that last thought, she lost herself in chattering as the hours passed, and the laughs filled the place. For even in the grim darkness of the galaxy, there was still hope. Chapter 36, The Call of Knowledge. While Cielo spent her time with her sisters and close ones in the square, Bann took advantage of the moment and walked inside the tumultuous palace that was filled with servants, government officials, and clan lackeys going back and forth. Seeing the incoming figure of the Saiyan, many froze on their stop while others almost shit their pants in scare. Seeing his presence affecting the productivity wheel, Bann rasped his voice as with a continue with your job, saw the people trembling at his deep tone while they bowed their heads and scattered away, successfully going back to their duties, although now with the news of the visit from the almighty Zeno into the palace, quickly spreading the word among the nobles, ministers, and officials in the building. Many started to wonder what was the purpose of his visit. Whilst Bann made a beeline towards the eviction chamber, a small group of people followed behind him unwillingly. Yet they did it nowadays as it was their job to ensure whatever the Zeno wished to be done. Call for the tech priests present in the city currently. I want them in the chamber as soon as possible. Suddenly Bann's voice made the servants shudder at the unexpected order. Yet they quickly scrambled away as they searched for the tech priests. Meanwhile, Bann continues floating towards the chamber while moving the doors with his telekinetic abilities. I wonder why was Gaku and the other Saiyans so reticent of using these abilities? They're too useful. Bann wondered to himself as he was slowly starting to take a liking to this ability. Since he came to know the place he was currently in, he used what little time he had on his own to train more variety of abilities that Ki granted him. Aside from the energy manipulation and physical enhancement, this led him to use way more his telepathic and telekinetic abilities when he could. Even though he also encouraged his Saiyan companions, they didn't seem fond to do so. That's why they suck at using them. They need to train it like a muscle so they become more proficient in it. Bann lamented to himself as he sighed out loud. Then again, it doesn't fit too much with the way of doing that Saiyans possess. Seeing the more primitive approach that his companions seemed to enjoy and use, he didn't think too much into the matter and accepted it as it was. With the teachings of the warp and the recent training against it, he knew that his companions had their plate full currently. After all, even if they were all unparalleled geniuses, the warp was a different matter than the Ki, which was something that each one of them seemed to be able to use without too much effort or knowledge. Sitting on the desk in the middle, he let out a sigh while thinking even I who wasn't the smartest lad back in the day was able to grasp the basic notions of Ki, so it's clear that the natural talent of Saiyan with the Ki isn't to trifle with. Closing his eyes, he let his thoughts stop wondering about those notions as he focused on the matter at hand. The reason he left some survivors back in the space station and the people who would be capable of accelerating the process of learning the basic technology from the Saiyans. The tech priests from the Adeptus Mechanicus. From what Bann recalled knowing from the lore he knew, they were people who worked alongside the Imperium while still retaining some independence over the latter. Placing more importance on knowledge and technology, he hoped this reason could be enough to lure these beings into serving under him. If they managed to learn everything quickly, it would be extremely useful to start producing everything earlier. His imagination started to wander towards the possibilities of such an outcome. Moving his head towards the door, he looked expectantly at the signatures he felt heading towards his position. While each person held a certain amount of Ki, there was a certain essence in it. One that with discerning eyes and senses, some like Bann or Celery would be able to pick interesting things, such as their nature. Some people held a more pure and sincere energy while others held a more malicious and negative. This sometimes could represent itself outwards, and in the case of Saiyans was represented in the color of their Ki blast. In the case of the hooded individuals with cybernetic limbs and staff that entered the chamber, it held a more distant and cold nature in it, different enough to make them stand out from the millions of signatures in Redentia currently. Staring at each one of the 6 figures that were in front of him, he took his time to analyze each one of them. Of them all, only one didn't have visible flesh to be observed while the rest still had their faces behind the lower mask that covered their jaw and mouth. He wasn't able to discern their genders as their bodies were covered under the hood characteristic of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Some had both limbs being replaced by cybernetic ones while others were a mix of them. Seeing their calculative eyes staring at his scouters, Bann started. Although some of your friends are still on their way, the majority of you are already here. His words took everyone's attention as they eyed with intrigue the figure capable of making their regiment submit. Although I already know who you are, the same couldn't be said of me, Bann said with a grin, while one tech priest couldn't help but answer him with confusion. You are a Zeno, more specifically the one that forced the guardsmen to focus on the green brutes. Am I right? The mix of his voice was of machine, human, and something else. The clear vigor in it made Bann think he was a young man. However, he could also be wrong. Nodding his head, he eyed the tech priest as he added with a mysterious tone, but do you think a normal Zeno is capable of what I am? With a simple no, the tech priest remained on his spot as he expected Bann to continue. And you're right. You see, I am not from this place, and I'm not talking about this planet. There was clear amusement in his voice as he reclined on the seat. Oh no, I am talking about another galaxy. He paused as he eyed their reaction, smiling wider while he saw the eyes of those who still held them widen in surprise, while some noises escaped from their Vox device that Bann was unable to understand. With clear disbelief, a voice with a higher pitch that was heavily distorted by the mechanical implant on its person, exclaimed out loud, you don't look older than an average teenager. And even with the fastest of engines, an intergalactic travel could take centuries. Moving his eyes towards the one that spoke, Bann gave them a toothy grin as he answered, why centuries when it took just a year, he. As his laugh echoed through the chamber, he felt amused at the petrified reaction of the tech priests. Not wanting to waste the chance to give a heavier punch, he added, and that was taking into consideration that we crossed half the universe in doing so. It could have been faster otherwise. Whatever the reaction Bann expected after saying that, never could he imagine the overwhelming tension that suddenly filled the chamber as he saw a glint passing through each one of the tech priest's eyes and cybernetic implants. The only reason that there wasn't silence in the chamber was due to the slow humming of the calculations made by the tech priests as they remained motionless, staring at Bann with maddening fervor. Your heartbeat is stable, your posture is relaxed. There's a 0.7% chance for the words you said to be a lie. Suddenly what could only be described as an amalgamation of machines exclaimed, as the tech priest who didn't showcase any inch of flesh stared at Bann with his cold mechanical eyes. Tilting his head, Bann smiled faintly as he said that 0.7% is just because I was still a baby while traveling. Briefly glancing at the rest of the tech priests he added, and this is just but a peck of the sea of knowledge that awaits you. Technology far more advanced than you could fathom is collecting dust in my ship. With each oration, Bann added more dramatism and pause as he finally offered his hand. Engines that could travel faster than light, communication devices capable of reaching the other side of the universe. He said this while tapping at his scouter as he continued, machines able to terraform even asteroids and many more, all waiting for you to learn them. His smile was devilish in the eyes of the tech priests as they knew that such a tantalizing offering wasn't out of free. More so when he was their enemy. Unable to contain himself, the younger tech priest asked with clear agitation, what is what you want in exchange, Zeno? The other tech priests, though silent, eyed with unusual intrigue at Bann as they didn't admonish the more bold and ignorant of their kin. More so when he did them a favor. Pausing briefly as he scanned the cunning look on some of the tech priests, Bann thought to himself, it will be better if I lay out the rules beforehand. And slowly he stated, you must know first something. For the price of learning our technology is for you to be unable to leave this planet forever. His words made the sheer interest in the tech priests diminish, while a more sinister thought encroached on their minds. You see, once you get to know more about our technology, it would be expected from you to help develop this world and teach other brilliant individuals of its use and secrets, Bann clarified as he remembered something which, if he wasn't wrong, was pretty common between the tech priest in Mars. These were greedy, cold-hearted, and hypocritical bastards that wouldn't doubt a moment to kill each other for such knowledge. Seeing them maintaining silence, he let out a smile while he said to them, you know, none of you need to answer me right now. Just think about this before coming to a conclusion. He got up on his feet and slowly walked down while punctualizing his sentences. Your ancestors traveled once through the stars, bringing back technology, advance, and civilization to worlds devastated through the age of strife. That is how your forged worlds were established and your power grew. By uncovering long-lost technology and being the ones to bring forth the Prometheus fire to rekindle the light of humanity. His words were like thunder booming into the priest's senses as they took root and called it for something deep within them. All of this was even before the Emperor made himself known in Terra. Just like you bunch, thousands of years ago other tech priests decided to lay their foundation in backward worlds. With a grin after seeing them catching his bait, he walked towards the doors of the chamber after feeling a key signature. Not without saying in his departure, just like in this world. His footsteps echoed through the chamber while he left behind the still motionless tech priests. What he offered and said was enough for now for their minds to take. And he also needed to wait for the incoming tech priests too. Yet the seed was already planted. Bann now only needed time to do its job while the tight grasp of his hand made the priests acknowledge the position they were in. Bann would be a fool if he let them go after telling them such a thing. Their fates were already sealed. What lay to wait now was how long it would take before their demise, and whether it would be natural or not. For the price of the Saiyan knowledge was death. Chapter 37, Getting to Know. After exiting the eviction chamber while leaving behind the troubled tech priests, Bann was now facing Aurora, who held her hand up in motion to knock on the door. Yet her eyes were open at the sudden figure of Bann with a dashing smile. Eyeing his gorgeous and bombshell of a fiancé, Bann greeted her hello there. Quickly able to recover herself, Aurora lowered her hand as she graciously greeted him with a cordial smile. Good evening, sire. And quickly eyed behind Bann as she asked, did something happen or were you about to call us all for another meeting? Frowning a bit for her way to greet him, he didn't point out as he answered her, nothing sort of that. I was just passing by and decided to not waste time and do something that I needed. Closing the doors behind him, he motioned with his right hand for Aurora to hook with hers. Complying with his silent request, Aurora noted to herself the clear figures of the tech priests before Bann closed the doors as they walked together while saying, oh I see. Moving her gaze towards his face, she started talking. The servants were alarmed by your presence and told us all. I suppose others would be on their way soon. She made Bann aware of this. Letting out a chuckle, Bann stared back at Aurora's beautiful face as he said, I don't see why they should be alarmed. I would have called you all. He then stared again at the front while adding, and with you here, it's more than enough to keep me entertained. Seeing his faint smile while saying that, Aurora quickly moved away from her gaze in embarrassment while she answered him, although I'm not pleased to hear that you see me as an entertainment, I do appreciate the meaning behind it either way. Receiving a chuckle from Bann, who glanced briefly at her while he said, and why wouldn't you be pleased? Your company is more than appreciated, and with your beauty every scenery is pleasant. Hearing his words, Aurora shook her head while she tried to explain to him, and that is why I said that I understood what you meant, but the definition of the word is, rather unpleasant all things considered. Bann didn't let her finish her words as he did it for herself. Considering you're my fiancé. He stopped and looked at her, while Aurora felt a blush appearing on her face as the intense stare of Bann made her weak as she looked back at him. His assertiveness and his looks were a lethal combo for the woman, who was taken under his mighty grasp and filled the night before the documents to prepare for their wedding. You know, he started while taking Aurora's hands and lowered his head to look directly into her eyes. I once read that those couples that get engaged and belong to high society do need to make it official by spending the night together. His words made Aurora feel her lips dry while her heart started drumming loudly in anxiety. And considering my current circumstances, I expect the following night for us to make it official. he finished while sighing internally, seeing the clear uncomfortable response from the woman. It can't be helped, I need to start raising our numbers, Bann thought to himself while lamenting. In another circumstance, he would have liked to woo this woman, as he felt that it was the funny part when meeting someone. Sadly, the universe he was living into didn't permit him any longer to waste more time. And with Aurora also aware of the duties of nobles, she nodded her head in response while her previous blushing face was nowhere to be seen as she tried to act with graciousness. Why yes. Her voice quivered a little. I'll see everything prepared beforehand. Feeling her hands grasping tightly his, Bann let out a forlorn smile as he turned around and led her through the corridor. The words were trapped in his throat as he acknowledged his reality. If it were the one from Earth, he would have told Aurora some comforting words. Yet he was now a being that was expected to act differently. Instead of words, I'll have to do it in some other way. Those were the words he tried to reassure himself with as they walked through the palace. They finally made their way to a spacious balcony that offered a breathtaking view of a lush and well-maintained garden. The garden was filled with a variety of blooming flowers, towering trees, and intricately designed shrubs that seemed to captivate their attention. Upon reaching the balcony, Bann quickly scanned the area and found a set of seats that were neatly arranged around the corners. He gestured towards the seats and let Aurora sit first, as he took the seat behind her. The flooring of the balcony was made of a rich and elegant mahogany black wood that perfectly complemented the surrounding granite-colored walls of the palace. The combination of colors and textures created a luxurious and sophisticated atmosphere that made them feel like royalty. Enjoying the view, he asked her, you know, something I forgot to ask you before, but where do you live? There was clear amusement in Bann's voice while asking this. Aurora looked at Bann for a moment and let out a sing-song chuckle while answering him. The palace itself could be considered my home. I've been raised here since I was a child. She moved her gaze towards the garden as she continued. My mother used to tell me stories down there about the Imperium and the heroes of the past. The clear long in the voice made Bann a little stunned, as he didn't expect such a simple question to lead to her telling him the past. Nonetheless, not wanting to be a prick, he tried following the thread as he asked, your mother, was she an official or something? Nodding her head, Aurora raised her gaze and looked behind the top of the far trees as she answered, she held the same position I have now. Moving her gaze towards his face, she finished, I am the Saiyan Chal of Faradras. Answering to the Lord of Faradras itself. The solemn tone behind her voice made Bann straighten his back out of reflex as he nodded as if understanding. I see, he said as if comprehending such a title. Then both of them remained in silence while enjoying the view, trying to ignore the heavy sounds coming from the squares gathering the Imperial Guard supporting units. Eyeing his figure after a while, Aurora bit her lips before being unable to hold back and ask him something that had been bothering her since she first saw him. Why did you bother conquering this world? With your strength you could be faring the stars and living more adventures than hassle yourself with all the nonsense that this is. Her eyes held a glint as she clenched her fist. For her, Bann was everything she wished to be since young. Free and unbridled of any expectation put into her, able to choose his fate and with the strength enough to back it up. Someone that the Imperium's restraint couldn't hold back. After being asked such a question, Bann couldn't help but stare back at Aurora and get lost in her alluring face while saying, because you need to start somewhere. Seeing her opening and closing her mouth as if trying to formulate her answer, Bann gave one last look to her lips and eyes as he moved his gaze away and eyed the sky. Besides, my homeworld was destroyed and I need a place to call home. All my strength is for naught if there's no place where I can go back and rest at ease. While saying so, Bann's mind couldn't help but be reminded of his comfortable and happy life back on Earth. A tight knot began to press in his chest as the conversation suddenly took a turn he wasn't ready to have. Raising on his feet, he paused a little bit before turning sideways, his head giving one last glance at Aurora as he started floating while saying with a toothy grin, I'll be going then, I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. He then disappeared on the horizon. Hearing his parting words, Aurora watched silently Bann's figure flying away while she clenched her fist. Her mind was in a swirl of thoughts. Not long after that, she let out a sigh and returned inside as her work was never ending. Meanwhile, Bann continued flying after briefly making sure that Cielo was still engrossed in her chatting. In just a moment his figure cut through the sky as he headed towards the base. There inside was someone he needed to talk with after putting such a thing off after all these days. Although it was a decision made in the spur of the moment, he never had been let down by his instincts before. As such, he was interested in knowing the reason why his body reacted in such ways before this simple woman. Spotting said person outside, doing exercise. He stopped on his spot as he took a moment to appreciate her. Her hair was cut short at the top and faded at the sides, giving her a distinct tomboyish appearance. Her hair color was a warm brown shade that complemented her overall look. However, what drew the most attention to her face were the scars that adorned it. A pink-colored complexion was marred by a burn scar that ran from her right jawline, almost reaching her eye. Despite the scar, her two green orbs were striking, and they added to her unique appeal. Overall, her appearance was a blend of toughness and vulnerability, making her an intriguing and unforgettable presence. The woman in question was donning her standard-issue flak armor, designed to offer the utmost protection in combat. Underneath her armor was a black wife-beater shirt that tightly hugged her plump and perky bosom, which was only accentuated by her slim waist. Her physique was toned and muscular, with densely packed muscles visible on her abdomen and arms. Her wide hips gracefully gave way to a pair of black military pants that were fitted tightly to her bodacious and thick figure. further accentuating her curves, with her backside standing out as it filled plenty of the pants and poorly hid her round bubble butt. She was a sight to behold, more so when her sweat further accentuated her womanly charms. Deciding it was time to speak with her, he slowly descended near her. Tap. It wasn't until his boots tapped the ground that the woman jolted up in alarm as she turned out with an anxious face, only to stare at the man who brought her here. Staying rooted in her position, her mouth went dry and a feeling of suffocation took hold of her while her heartbeat increased dramatically. Her fight-or-fly response kicked in. Letting out a sigh and restraining his primitive side, Bann nodded his head towards her while saying hello, we're finally able to meet each other. Stepping forward he closed the distance while the woman stayed with both eyes wide open, her ears ringing while her chest was about to burst forward. Various emotions crossed through her mind but the most overwhelming one was pure dread. The individual before her was the avatar of power. Pure and unbridled power. Only when the faces of her companions passed through her mind was she able to look back at Bann with defiance aside from fear. She was ready to lose her life, as she would rather die than surrender without fighting. Lowering her stance in the fighting position, she raised her arms and legs in the characteristical fighting style of her city. Come forth you scummy Xenos. I'll be damned if I am the first Teviot to die without fighting. Her voice was strong, and her tone resolute. Seeing her antics and hearing her words, made Bann let out a smile while he stared with amusement. He always liked women with character, it always ignited a fire of conquest within him. And now with his Saiyan body, such instinct was only further exacerbated. With a husky tone, Bann got into his fighting stance while saying I like the way you greet. Using our fists is a good way to know someone. With eyes burning with fire, both stared at each other as their unorthodox way of greeting was about to begin. Chapter 38, Knowing Through Fists. Like steel spring the woman launched herself forward, carelessly and bold, yet her fists were firm and resolute. Her kicks, although easily avoidable for Bann, were fast for the unprepared. Yet for Bann, even with his ki lowered to her levels, he was vastly superior. Arg. She groaned as she launched various barrages of punches, side kicks, and elbows, only to ever miss as Bann leapt around her like an agile leopard. Frustrated due to being unable to land even one punch, the woman's mind started to fail her as anxiousness and desperation started to take hold of her mind. Sadly for her, this translated into a continuous decrease in her strength, explosiveness, and tempo. Seeing this, the previous amusing face of Bann changed into a frown as he couldn't help but admonish the woman don't lose the focus in the battle. And to further punctuate his words, a swift but almighty fist reached the woman's stomach. Bam! Her eyes went wide, and the breath escaped her lungs, while spit flew out of her mouth. Quickly the strength faded away from her body as she went pale. Her knees failed as she fell down. Muffled gasps were all that could be heard, as she kept trying to regain her breath while her mind was unable to formulate even a thought. While I do appreciate the fighting spirit of someone, I also disdain those that don't focus on their task at hand, he said while crouching down beside her ear. More so when their fate is on the line. He stood again, while the woman's mind echoed Bann's words like thunder. Her breath quickened while strength ran again through her body as she forced herself to stand again. With a hitched breath, there was a glint of resolution in her gaze as she stared at the face of Bann. He was the man according to the battle sister, who would take her as his woman. A fate she wasn't willing to fall into, not before giving her all. Seeing her fierce face once again, a predatory smile rose again on his face as he murmured loud enough for both, now that's more like I want, and went forward. His fist and kicks trembled while they landed on her guard. Not because of the shock itself, but the sheer effort that Bann was putting to diminish his ki. The battle itself was a training of ki control, something that although Bann was leaps ahead compared to his companions, it didn't even reach the solace of the feat of the characters of Dragon Ball. When Son Goku was a kid, seeing the woman taking the punches and kicks while also using the chance to attack, Bann's opinion of her raised a few notches, as even in the face of overwhelming force in front of her, she was willing to trade blows and sacrifice herself to land just a punch. That's the spirit of a warrior. He couldn't help but think to himself while seeing this. After so many years spent with the Saiyans, their way of thinking took root in him. And while a maniacal smile formed on Bann's face, the same couldn't be said on the woman's, as her left hand broke while hitting Bann, making her grimace in pain while biting her lips to hold back a pained whine. Tears started to gather on her face while each movement took more and more effort in her body. She winced in pain after her right hand also broke after punching square on his nose. The wind was taken out of her lungs too as Bann's jab was followed by a high knee directly into her chest. Flying away she landed on her bum on the ground while Bann's maniacal smile slowly morphed into a poker face. The woman didn't even try to get on her feet as she was openly weeping while staring listlessly at the sky. Her hands were red and swollen and her knuckles were bleeding. She looked rough, but more than that, nowhere was her fierce resolution from before. Now that your tantrum is over, let's get down to why I am here, Bann said while letting out a sigh. The tension in his body quickly faded away as his ki rose again to its normal value. Walking towards her position, his footsteps sounded like rumbling in her ears as she closed her eyes in defeat. What's your name, woman? His deep voice shook her bones, while shivers were sent down her spine. With a muffled cry, she answered, Mirella. I am Mirella Teviot. Lowering his eyes to look at her, a shadow appeared on Bann's visage while he snarled, Mirella, tell me, are you aware why did I brought you with me? Covering her weeping eyes with her forearm she nodded while answering, I do. The sister Cielo told me. There was clear unwillingness in her voice as she said, mixed with shame and regret. Unable to look at her, Bann raised his gaze while saying, well, it seemed that you're lucky. I don't need a sorry excuse of a warrior that weeps on defeat as a concubine. And while his words weren't loud, for Myrella they were like a rumbling in her ears as she froze on the spot while her eyes went wide open. Stumbling to get on her knees, she looked at Bann's wide and tall back as she asked with disbelief, the words you said, are they truth? Looking at her sideways, he snarled, of course they are, although don't expect me to take you there. Pointing his finger towards the northeast, he finalized, that way you'll be heading into Redentia. Along the path there are various villages. Now out. Jolting into her feet, Myrella started to run away while clenching her teeth at the pain in her body. Yet her eyes were filled with joy, relief, and hope. After giving up and imagining her life as a breeding sow to a Xenos, she was ready to kill herself if Bann were to force upon her. Yet now here she was, stumbling and walking in the direction that Bann pointed out. Giving a last look into the direction of the guardsman, Bann let out another scoff of annoyance while he tried to communicate with Ramla. It was clear she was unwilling. It's not like with Augusta, who did seem interested in me. This time there was none of it, Bann said as he reassured himself of his decision. There won't be a lack of women for him after his rise in power in Faradras, so he didn't see the need to force himself into an unwilling woman, even if said woman was someone who stirred his primitive side. Lo que Sira. He mumbled the old saying that his grandma used to tell him. His finger finally was able to connect the scouter with Ramla. Come down. You need to look after the scholars. He walked forward to the base while the sounds of Ramla gulping down the food reached his ears as she groaned, gore. Later. I'm Ogupy munching the meat, nom nom. Frowning, he reminded her, we had a deal, remember? Keep your word. Hearing her despairing over the other side, he ordered, I want you here in 15 minutes. Don't force me to get your ass down here. With those words, he cut the communication as he sat down at the door into the base, eyeing the sunset while the first stars filled the sky with the starry blanket. His mind was lost in thoughts as he pondered over the man whom he become. After ensuring that the scholars came into the base and Ramla looked upon them carefully, he left them inside while they studied through Ramla's ship computer as they wrote down the four-pointed technologies, blueprints, and knowledge, while Bann flew out to meet Cielo back in Redentia. With the two decided to pass the night into the palace as the battle sister took her time to say goodbye to her sisters, and with Bann spending time meeting them. Although not fond of the words and way of treating that the battle sisters gave him, he let it pass as they were clearly adamant about leaving behind their long-standing sister. Thus, in such a way, the night passed in Faradras until Celery, Ramla, Ruku and Aprit came to pick up Bann to meet again with the Eldari in the space station. It was time to not only test their strength and abilities, but their temperament through battle, as just like Bann was able to deduce the unwillingness of Myrella, the Syans were able to pick their opponents' attitudes through an exchange of blows. After the Syans agreed with each other to let the Eldari fight into the land so they could better exploit their skills, they made their way into the space station while quickly flying through the corridors until they reached the hangar bay, where they saw the Eldari spacecraft with the 3 Eldars in front waiting for them. Landing in front of them, the Syans barely contained their smug faces as they picked up the awe from the Eldari after seeing them flying with such ease. Guten Morgen, Freunde. I hope you're all well rested. Bann greeted them with a wide smile. Since we're here to hereby invite you to Faradras, he finalized. While Celery, who was on his right, continued, it is a Syan custom for us to trade blows and see how capable are those who we call as friends. She eyed Bann while saying the last. Although accustomed to his quirks in regards to speaking, she did so to remind him to not call the individuals in front of them as friends, more so when they didn't prove themselves worthy until now. Giving a subtle smile to them, Eurocane nodded his head while saying, greetings to you all. We are pleased to hear such words first thing in the morning. Irene, different from the night before, looked more relaxed while she greeted them with a nod. I find endearing and worthwhile the way your people verify the strength of your friends, she said with a plain tone, yet her eyes were more welcome this time. What does Guten Morgen means? Meanwhile, Anna asked, puzzled while tilting her head sideways, staring at Bann. The latter gave her a warm smile as he said, it's simply good morning in another language. Did you sleep well, Anna? I fear that your skills will be in need today. A cocky grin escaped Bann as he stretched his body. Nodding her head with energy, she clasped her hands together while saying, yes. I slept super well, so don't worry since I'm going to patch you all together. Her radiant smile made many smile at her, but Celery, who only raised her eyebrow. You're going to take that ship down? Or do you want us to take y'all with us? Asked Ruku, a little bit impatient as he was eager to see for himself the capabilities of Eurocane. Turning sideways, Eurocane eyed the Eldari spacecraft while saying, I think we're to find more comfortable flying down with our ships rather to be a nuisance to all of you. His troubled smile didn't escape Bann's eyes as he looked amused. You won't be a nuisance at all, it would rather be faster that way, added Aprit. I insist. Only to receive another negative from the warlock. Motioning to Irene and Anna to get into the craft, he said to all, we'll follow you all closely, and wheeled into the ship. Shrugging at their antics, the Syan group floated again while Ramla complained, are we not going to eat our breakfast here? The sound of her stomach accompanied her words, only to receive a dismissal from Celery, who scoffed, we're going to eat in the base, there's plenty of meat there. Now let's go. Taking the lead, she exited through the hangar bay while the rest followed closely. The Eldari craft soon later did the same as they all moved back to Faradras. After a while, both parties landed outside the Saiyan base that was filled with tents from the various scholars sent by the noble houses and other kingdoms around the planet, who looked alarmed at the sight of the Xenos spacecraft. After pointing out a farthest place to fight, Bann exclaimed, "Here's how things will go, we're going to spar with everything we had." While his words made the Saiyans more restless as they wanted to jump first, both Eurocane and Irene frowned at his words. "Anath here will make sure we don't die, so let's do it." It didn't help that Bann's words riled up the Saiyans while the stretching of their muscles showcased the brutal wall of meat they'd face. Letting out a deep sigh, Eurocane motioned Irene to go first while on the other side, Ramla jumped forward into a battle stance. A large feral grin adorned her face as she eyed the plain-looking Eldari warrior, who slowly put on her helmet while her icy eyes started calculating her actions. It was time to see how well the Eldars would fare against the Saiyans. Chapter 39, Saiyan vs Eldari. The stance of Ramla was one of that let out her confidence not only in her strength, but resilience. As the power beneath her muscles was tense and ready to let out her power in a flash, blood started to pump wildly as each cell in her body prepared to jump into action while her senses heightened. Different from her, the visage of Irene was one of calm and patience. Her battle stance gave away the discipline and preparation she went through to become a fearsome warrior from the craft world Mimira. Her breath was steady, and the perfect physique given to get by the ancestral was further enhanced by techniques of old taught under the Asuryani path of warrior. Begin. The voice of Bann gave away the start of the fight as Ramla bolted against the Eldari with such speed that left the latter slightly surprised. Yet she quickly reacted by raising her guard in preparation. Tensing her body to receive the impact on her guard against the jab, quickly changed midway through her attack as she kicked sideways with her leg to the Eldari who was unable to react at the extreme speeds showcased by the Saiyan. Receiving the full brunt of her strength, Irene gritted her teeth as the pain expanded through her body while her leg became numb. Yet not being one to be left unresponsive, she quickly countered by giving a touch against a point in Ramla's shoulder blade, followed by a punch against the Saiyan's cheek. Yet instead of grimacing in pain, Ramla forced back the punch as she smiled at Irene with a maniacal grin. She moved her body quickly, ignoring her numb shoulder, and tried to sweep the Eldari's legs. The Eldari nimbly dodged the sweep, while sharply and flexibly grabbing one of the Saiyan's arms and attempting to pull her backwards into a headlock. Failing in the attempt as Ramla's strength was vastly greater and she simply forced the Eldari to break the lock by threatening to throw her. Pushing Celery's back as she distanced herself away, Irene analyzed, "It's impossible, her strength and hard body will be such that I can't win in a melee duel." Gritting her teeth at the bitter truth, Irene decided to use her psychic abilities. It was more than clear to her that with a single well-placed blow, it was the end of the fight, and she would be lucky not to get seriously hurt. Slightly surprised by the speed and agility demonstrated in the brief exchange, Ramla was undeterred and accelerated against the Eldari. "Come here? We still couldn't punch each other properly," Ramla exclaimed as she came dangerously close to Irene, who in alarm used a rune and channeled her psychic power into a bolt of energy. Zap! Boom! The shuddering sound of lightning invaded the area as an explosion engulfed Ramla's body, filling the surrounding area with smoke. Still standing, raising her eyebrows in surprise from behind her helmet, Irene couldn't help but think to herself as she moved away as fast as she could after sensing Ramla standing still. Moving away from the smoke with her right hand, Ramla jumped after Irene while exclaiming with a pissed-off expression that did manage to hurt. A red swollen piece of her left cheek was visible to everyone. Ramla's speed increased as she suddenly appeared below Irene, who was caught mid-air while doing a pirouette. "Oh crap," was everything she could think before the air was taken out of her lungs and blood escaped her mouth. Boom! The clouds in the morning sky dispersed as Irene's body was sent flying like a ragdoll at great speed. Ramla, who was about to launch herself to finish the fight, was suddenly stopped by the figure of Bann in front of her, grasping her shoulder. "Stop, you won." His face was plain as he looked at her. Meanwhile, Eurocane used his abilities to stop Irene's body and retrieve it back without further harming her. Anath quickly moved to his side to assist the unconscious warrior once she was brought down. Meanwhile, Celery and Ruku shook their head at Ramla's action while commenting she quickly lost her temper. Instead of further training, she ends up things quickly. "What a waste," Celery scoffed. Hearing their words and seeing Bann devoid of any emotions, Ramla couldn't help but slump her shoulders as she let out a sigh, regretting finishing things this quickly. Walking towards the Saiyan group, she let out a troubled smile while scratching her head. "I guess I wasted my chance to train." Her words received plenty of nods from Aprit and Ruku, while Celery told her what was the point if not training ourselves against them. "We already know they have less ki than us," shaking her head while crossing her arms. After ensuring that Irene was checked, Eurocane let out a deep sigh while thinking their strength is nothing to scoff at. "Physically, I doubt there's any match in the whole galaxy for them." Opening his eyes, he then stared at Ramla's cheek while adding, "Although when it comes to psychic abilities, I'm going to see it by myself." Jumping in front of Bann, who was eyeing Eurocane all this time, the warlock said, "It is my turn, I suppose," with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Bann nodded his head while he pointed himself with his thumb. "I'm going to be your enemy." Not before being interrupted by Celery, who unfolded her arms as she looked over him with a pissed-off expression. "Hey, I want to be the one training this time." Only to receive a negative shook from Bann, who simply said negative. Turning his head in her direction, he clarified, "You already know you're strong. Let us the weaklings train now." A toothy grin adorned his face while saying so. Ruku, Aprit and Celery scoffed at his sarcastic words, as he was second to Celery only. Jumping away from Eurocane, he eyed the warlock who had various runes floating around him, waiting for the start of the battle. Taking the role of judge, Celery marked the start with a plain begin. Instantaneously fire engulfed the warlock as the elements were cast upon the previous position of Bann, who was forced to evade as a storm of bolts of lightning assaulted his positions while he continued to retreat. Not expecting to be forced to evade, Bann frowned while he pointed with his right hand towards Eurocane, quickly gathering a key blast and sending him away. Hoish! Boom! Debris was falling around as smoke engulfed the area. However, Bann's frown deepened as he started seeing various afterimages of the warlock moving around his position, changing position every second while channeling more and more attacks through his runes. Bann thought to himself, this is certainly annoying, as he was forced to erect a key barrier around him. Eurocane was like a tempest, moving fast and unpredictably around the battlefield and channeling powerful attacks that could harm Bann if he didn't protect his body with ki. Not wanting to be left unmoving, Bann jumped towards the sky as he flew high. Positioning both hands in front of him, he started barraging the area with ki blasts like a machine gun. Za. Boom 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 boom. The ground beneath their feet quaked violently, sending clouds of dust and debris billowing into the air. The turbulent winds whipped around them, pushed away by the force of the shockwaves. Anaeth, who was in the middle of treating Irene, couldn't help but gaze in awe at the incredible scene before her. She had heard countless tales of the incredible power that warlocks were capable of unleashing, but now she was seeing it firsthand. But also witnessing an alien race that was on par with them in terms of sheer power and otherworldly abilities. However, these beings had not spent years honing their skills through intense training and meditation like the warlocks did. It was a truly remarkable sight to behold. A bluish shield appeared around Eurocane, who looked with a solemn look at Bann, who kept barraging the area. Taking another rune, he started channeling it while a swirl slowly started to appear above Bann, who seemed oblivious to it. The reality started bent as the sheer power channeled by the warlock created energy arcs of pure raw destructive energy, which with a gesture of his hand, rained upon Bann with an earth-shattering rumble, making his body fall through the air. Not wasting his chance, Eurocane channeled more energy through his witchblade and pointed towards the falling figure of Bann, who fought to maintain his consciousness. Unexpectedly and taken by surprise, Bann was hit with an incredibly powerful attack that managed to bypass his ki coating. He had not anticipated that such an attack could be possible. As a result, Bann's armor was left with two gaping holes that cut through the pauldron guard, piercing through his flesh, bones, and lungs. Blood gushed out of his wounds, while his muscles slowly lost their strength. Despite the severity of his injuries, Bann refused to give in to the darkness that threatened to consume him. Summoning his inner strength, he raised his ki just in time to create a new ki barrage to counter the energy arc previously unleashed by Eurocane. Boom. Crackling. Bann was determined not to lose the training match so easily. He steadied his body and faced Eurocane, gathering his inner energy and channeling it into a concentrated sphere of power in his mouth. With a thundering scream, he sent the sphere hurtling towards the warlock, while simultaneously launching himself towards the man in close quarters. Eurocane, taken aback by Bann's sudden attack, could do nothing but raise his barrier on sheer reflex. He watched helplessly as Bann closed in on him with incredible speed. In mere seconds, both Eurocane's barrier and body gave way, and the two collided with a loud crash. Bann's knee made contact with Eurocane's helmet with a crushing force, almost knocking the warlock off his feet. The blow was so powerful that Eurocane's helmet cracked under the impact, and he felt a sharp pain coursing through his head. Despite this, he managed to maintain his stance, albeit barely. Arg! Eurocane let out a piercing scream as shards of his helmet visor impaled his eyes. The force of Bann's knee was so strong that it broke his nose and almost shattered his mouth. Through the chaos and pain, Eurocane instinctively tapped into the power of the warp, drawing energy through all his runes and even beyond them, creating a swirling vortex of destruction around him. The maelstrom was a desperate attempt to survive and fight back against Bann. Seeing the fight getting out of hand rapidly, Celery tried to move between the two figures. However, in midair, she saw Bann's bloodied hand knocking down the warlock with a simple, yet powerful slap. Pa! Thud! The barrage of psychic attacks at 0 point suddenly stopped as Eurocane's helmet was broken half, letting everyone witness the injuries that Eurocane suffered. 7 sharp pieces of his helmet pierced through his bloodied eyes. His nose was a mess as it was completely shattered. Teeth were missing from his mouth, his lips were split open, and a gruesome piece of bone pierced through his chin. Catching Bann's large figure compared to her petite frame, Celery felt her heart clench while eyeing what was left of Bann. His arms were filled with deep gnashing cuts that oozed blood, and his armor held various holes where charred flesh hung out. Parts of his skin were charred and slowly fell out of his body. The only places that didn't hold deep wounds were his face and his legs. The rest of him was a bloody mess. Celery's voice trembled with fear and desperation as she cried out to Anaeth, her eyes fixed on Bann's bloodied form lying on the ground. Heal him, she implored, her voice rising several notches. Anaeth's heart skipped a beat as she saw the severity of Bann's injuries, but she composed herself quickly and drew upon her runic power. She channeled the energy through her hands, which glowed with a bright, whitish golden light. As she placed her hands on Bann's chest, the healing energy flowed into him, knitting slowly his wounds together and mending his broken bones. Celery breathed a sigh of relief as she watched the light suffuse Bann's body, bringing him back from the brink of death. Ramla looked closely at Bann's body as her heart squeezed, a cold sweat ran down her back as an unknown fear gripped her being. She opened and closed her mouth several times, yet her voice was muffled in her throat. Unbeknownst to her, her body trembled as she watched the most superficial wounds on Bann's body heal with rapid speed. Ruku brought Eurokane's body and lay beside Bann on the dusty floor. Although Bann was the one with more urgent wounds, the warlock was in dire need of healing too. Silence permeated the area as Anaath worked relentlessly to heal Bann's life-threatening injuries. Minutes passed by and the most superficial wounds were nowhere to be seen, while others were slowly but surely closing and mending together. While this happened, Irene slowly started to regain her consciousness as she looked at the blue sky. Her ears were ringing while memories slowly started to come back into her, making her sit her bum and look around alarmed, only to see the various figures of the Syans surrounding a light. Squirming her eyes, she was able to spot the figure of Bann and Eurokane alongside Anaath, with the latter using her abilities on Bann. When she looked more carefully into the bloodied face of Eurokane, she rose to her feet swiftly as she approached them. Seeing the perilous state that the warlock and her senior were in, she closed her eyes and made sure to still feel his soul within his body, letting out a sigh of relief when she noticed he was still there. After asking and getting her answer, she remained silent while looking solemnly at Anaath, who was sweating and looking focused on her task. After tirelessly healing Bann's wounds, Anaath finally decided to shift her focus to Eurokane. It was well over 30 minutes since she had started, and the task at hand was not easy. However, she remained determined and determinately worked through every bruise and laceration that Eurokane had sustained. Fortunately, the healing process took less time than it had for Bann, and Eurokane remained unconscious throughout the process, albeit with fewer teeth in his mouth. Despite the challenges, Anaath persevered and remained committed to healing her patients to the best of her abilities. Seeing both party leaders unconscious, they all agreed to finalize the training and bring them back into the space station so they would rest into proper rooms. Marking down the first defeat of the Syans, in the hands of the warlock Eurokane reigned from the craft world Mimira. Chapter 40, Awake. Be steady. This is just but the start of it. I was wrong. They're coming. They're looking at you. Be steady. They'll serve you well. Find him. Hundreds or even thousands of voices sounded in my head, and a chittering noise in the back was driving me mad as a golden hue alongside what could be described as violet gas surrounded me. Be steady. I tried to ignore the voices while the memories started to come back to me. The sudden realization of what had happened made me feel bitter. I got confident and paid the price, although it was a good thing that happened now rather than in a more threatening situation. What was more, I was able to know an important piece of information that would serve me well for the time to come, and the people that I would eventually face. The psychic energy of the warp was able to harm us. To what extent? Well, that needed more testing for me to see. But one thing was true. Not even our godly bodies were able to withstand the raw power that the Imperium was able to create. But the key is also able to face it. There's definitely more that is escaping my current notions and knowledge. I thought to myself while the images of my attack tearing apart Eurokane's shield came to me. The key and the warp were able to counter each other. So it all remained to see which one was able to overpower the other with less quantity. Bann. I recognized the voice as one of the many that were echoing in my head, yet seeing it overcome the other I paid it attention this time. Come and see me. The voice said with great effort, almost as if was in its last legs. It sounded weary and pitiful. Yet for some reason, it was able to reign over the others. I waited for the voice to sound again, only for the amalgamation of thousands of voices to keep saying different phrases while that voice remained silent. Deciding to train instead, I delved into my mind while I felt my body relaxing. The golden hue started to get clear in my mind, while a sound started to increase each moment that passed. A chittering started to increase, forcing me to further try to ignore it, only for me to realize something. The sheer magnitude of it was deafening the thousands of voices, while an oppressive feeling started to encroach my chest. The golden hue that surrounded me started to diminish while a giant nebula was slowly approaching my position, painting my surroundings with its color. I felt my chest accelerating like a drum while my ears started to ring as the chittering was slowly driving me mad. My eyes moved around while started to feel dizzy and lost. Are you okay, Bann? Opening my eyes wide, I recognized the voice of Ramla at my side. Turning my head towards her, I was able to see my pale and fearful face through the reflection in her onyx eyes, making me close my eyes while I took a deep breath and opened them to stare at her with a reassuring smile. Yeah, I'm okay. Although it was clear that my response didn't convince her as there was concern in her expression, I chose to divert her attention with questions. How's Eurokane? Did I sleep a lot? Although I wasn't able to see the state I left the Eldar, what I did know was that I slapped the man pretty hard. Mostly because I recognized that if I didn't use part of my strength, the battle would have been lost. A wry smile formed on Ramla's face as she answered, yeah, that man is okay, he only looked pissed that you left him with fewer teeth. She then brought her chair nearer the bed that I was laying into as she continued, and it should have passed half a day? I don't know really since we took you to the space station. When she said the last part, she motioned with her chin towards the window to the other side of my bed, making me look in the direction and see the planet. Letting out a sigh and closing my eyes, I mumbled under my breath, God damn it, I wasted half a day like this. Hearing my words, I heard Ramla laughing while she mocked me. He, you lost to a lanky man. I opened my eyes and saw a playful glint in her eyes while she said this. Snorting, I answered her while saying, well, we both did commit mistakes this day, although mine was worse. A wry smile adorned my face while Ramla nodded her head. You should have seen Celery's face. She moved her head closer while she whispered she was ready to pounce at anyone if that blondie pointy-haired woman didn't heal you. She then moved her eyes to her left top as she started giggling. Heh, she even flew away a couple of hours ago to let out some steam. As I heard her words, I couldn't help but smile to myself while a warm feeling filled my chest. It was nice to know that Celery held me in such esteem. How lucky I am, I've got 2 strong Saiyan warriors looking after me, I said to Ramla with a toothy grin while teasing her. Instead of the reflection or mock that I was always accustomed to her, Ramla flushed her cheeks as she lowered her gaze and suddenly looked meek. Noticing her muscles tensing, I heard her muttering, of course I'll look after you. You always have taken care of me. She then raised her gaze and looked at me for a moment, until she moved her gaze away while she said, and you're the only one that doesn't believe I'm an idiot. Although not expecting such words, I let out a sincere smile while I grabbed Ramla from her shoulders and brought her in a tight hug while reassuring her as I caressed her back. Of course, you're not an idiot, Ram. You're such a sweet girl. I heard her mumbling some unintelligible words in my chest while I continued hugging her and caressing her head. It's their loss if they can't appreciate your golden retriever energy. I couldn't help but curse at the others for making her think this way of herself. Feeling Ramla moving her head, I stared at her while she looked strangely as she asked what is golden retriever energy. I couldn't help but let out a laugh while I started trying to explain to her. During all the time caressing her as we hug each other, staying that way for around 20 minutes until I saw it more necessary to move out of bed and do what was needed. Getting help from Ramla to put on my armor, I stared at the torn pieces in certain parts of my black body spandex while I told her so it's only the 2 of us in the space station and the Eldari. Hearing Ramla humming in confirmation as she brought my only remaining spare piece of armor while saying they all went down after confirming you were stable, so they should be hunting down orcs by now. I remained silent while I nodded in acknowledgement. It was a good thing that they continued with their duties. After all, we were now in charge of the security of this planet, and each setback would threaten any of our plans. Putting on my scouter on my left ear, I touched it a few times until the power level scanner started to beep. Blip 8.049. A slight smile formed on my face while I confirmed the number. Since I woke up, I noticed a great increase in my power level. Passing from 6.822 units to 8.000 was a great boost in such a short time, successfully putting me behind Celery, who I knew had more than 12.000 units. We weren't able to scan her full scope of power, as she never raised her ki until now. Since it wasn't necessary, I kinda regret sometimes teaching them how to manipulate the ki, I thought to myself. Although during our Uzuru transformation, the ki manipulation was akin to breathing, it wasn't something the average Saiyan would perceive as something they could use outside the transformation. So I wasn't surprised after knowing what ki was. Why didn't the Saiyan from the show and manga learn before? And even now after a decade, I'm still unable to use more complex techniques. I tried to disperse such thoughts from my head as the jubilation for finally surpassing Ruku still drew a smile on my face, making Ramla notice it as she smiled me back while saying, so I guess you noticed it, huh? It's incredible how you were able to surpass us all through the years. Her bright eyes diminished as she lowered her gaze as she added, while us who were supposed to be the elite are still behind you. Yet, instead of mopping, she clenched her fist as I saw a fierce glint of determination pass through her eyes as she raised her head and stared at me again. Raising her fist, she exclaimed, I promise you, Ban, that I will also get a lot stronger so I can surpass you again. The sheer will and energy behind her words made me feel pumped up as I grasped her fist with my palm. Eyeing her with a wide grin, I said, I'll take your word if that's the case. Then in a swift motion, I slapped her perky, wide, muscle-filled cheek with a PLA, making Ramla get flushed while she let out a somewhat cute kia. Not minding her reaction, I just exclaimed while walking forward, now let's go meet those Eldari. I hope our little battles helped to rearrange their heads, hee. Now that both sides' strengths were showcased, it was time for round 2 of negotiations. Once they met with the Eldari party, they went and sat in the royal chamber while the food was sprawled on the coffee table while Ban wolfed it down. His appetite after such a battle and taking grievous wounds was astonishing. Not minding his manners, he started to speak, so, now that we had time to cool off and see the others' capabilities, what about resuming the negotiations? Ban asked while he munched a piece of leg from an unknown animal. Eurocane looked first at Anaeth as he let out a deep sigh while nodding his head and making an utmost effort to not open his mouth as he spoke. After today's event, I cannot say that your race capabilities aren't marvelous. He then paused as he stared at Ban with a frown as he asked, with trepidation and a beating heart, something that gnawed his mind through the entire morning. Before we delve deeper, tell me, have you taken our battle seriously? Although he didn't explicitly say, Ban grasped the meaning behind his words as he gulped down the food from his mouth, while slapping Ramla's hand from picking a piece of food. Then, staring with fierceness at the warlock, he simply said no. His response brought an immediate response as both Eileen and Eurocane reacted negatively. Before letting a misunderstanding take place, he added, I put myself some limitations, but I took it as seriously as I could under them. A wry smile appeared on his face as he further said, I underestimated your capabilities and paid the price. Eurocane stared intently at Ban's eyes in search of deception, yet all he saw was pure sincerity. A notion that brought shimmers down the spine of the warlock, as one possibility made itself apparent. After seeing his keys attack, Urocane admitted bitterly to himself a harsh truth. In a real-life scenario, there won't be a battle between the two, as he would vaporize before he could be able to do something. Yet, finding relief at his response, a subtle smile dawned upon the stern Eldari face as he said, "Then that makes things easier." Subtly eyeing Anaeth he added, "Since we've only found dissent in one matter yesterday, what about this proposal?" Bann stopped eating while he motioned Urocane to continue with his head. He was curious about what the warlock came up with. Motioning with his hand towards Anaeth, Urocane started, "Our healer here has shown her interest in staying at your side for the time being. We can take this matter more slowly as things may sprout or not, while at the same time, I'll find willing females to fulfill what you wish for." Irene immediately shut tight her lips as she raised her neck. The words spoken by Urocane were like an insult to her ears, yet she knew to say otherwise. The individuals in front of her were far more capable than she first thought, and after a brief but deep talk with each other, Urocane convinced her of the rightness of his actions. Even further, the person who was the victim here, Anaeth, looked expectantly at Bann. Although she didn't explicitly say that she was interested in him, she did mention that she found entertaining their company and that she was willing to fulfill what the Farseer tasked her. "Holy shit, I've got the big prize." Bann was over the moon in his mind while he tried to maintain a plain face. Even if he didn't end up boning the Eldar female, just having her at his side and giving him a constant zenkai after every battle was enough to seal whatever deal they may reach with the craft world Mimira. Slowly nodding his head, Bann spoke with measure. "That's a fair offer, and it certainly showcases your willingness to abide by your words." Gathering ki around his right hand, he vaporized whatever remains of food could be there as he raised towards Urocane. "If there's nothing else, I think you have a deal, Warlock Urocane." Eyeing his hand, Urocane slowly moved while raising his head to stare at Bann, saying himself, "You'll find your action today as a wise one. From now on, you're a friend of Mimira." Seeing the formality of the act, made everyone in the room rise on their feet while they looked solemnly. An alliance that would forever alter the fate of the Eldars was made, and the doom of a god from the chaos was on the march, to the joy of a certain fate weaver.